Welcome to another episode of Not Investment Advice. We got the NAA boys, two of us here today, Trung Phan, me, Master Effects himself, and Bilal Zaidi. Unfortunately, Jack Butcher could not join us today. He's got food poisoning. I hope he doesn't mind us telling people that. Send your love and thoughts to him on Twitter. But we got a very special guest, David SENRA, founder of Founders Podcast. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, guys. As we were talking right before recording, first of all, I'm going to miss Jack because I'm a huge fan of his, but I'm also a huge fan of your podcast. Like it's really hard to find like a new podcast to listen to. And as I was telling you guys, like, I'm pretty sure I just randomly discovered it through Trunk's tweets.
Yeah.
And what I love is the format. Like, I probably listened to 20 or 30 hours of you guys talking. Right. And the idea was like, when people are like, hey, you know, fundamentally both of our podcasts are the same in the sense that it's like business audience, educational is like the reason, but you guys do a lot better job of like being entertaining and funny. But what I love is like, I know you guys have guests on every once in a while, but this idea, which I think more people should copy, because when people come to me and they're like, hey, I want to start a new podcast, it's always the same shit. It's like, I want to interview entrepreneurs. Nothing wrong with that. There's just, everybody's doing it.
The bajillion of them, yeah.
Yeah, and the idea, it's like the same three people or the same two people or whatever. In my case, one person. I just think more podcasts should be that. I know you guys throw in the occasional guest and you can bring in whoever you want as much as you want, but the 95% of the episodes that I've listened to of Non-Investment Advice has been just you three.
Oh, that's awesome, man. So
yeah,
like,
that's
you're
good
like,
to know.
Cool guest. And you're like, oh, whatever. Like Michael Saylor, I've heard him a million times. I don't need to shield Bitcoin again right now.
I definitely skipped over that one.
Well, David, actually, this is great because I have two questions. So I'll start with the first one is, how confused were you on the first episode? It's like, yo, who is this Vietnamese guy?
No. I knew who you were because I went from not knowing who Trung Phan was to I can't get away from all his threads. And they're like, the whole thing about Twitter is
chasing you around the internet like a remarketing ad. They're just like,
well, because you guys have talked a lot about like basically we have like a perfect alignment. It's almost like I'm like the fourth member of NIA because I just agree. I find myself agreeing with almost everything you say. And you guys talk a lot about like the different audiences that you have on different platforms, right? And so I heard Bilal say this too. It's like the difference the way you feel after you use Twitter compared to the way you feel after you use TikTok. Like, and I know me and Trung have talked about in private, like TikTok's a monster. Like they're dominating. And even me, like I use Twitter for distribution for people because there's my audience that are interested in Founders Podcast is definitely there, right? Ton of entrepreneurs, ton of investors, ton of executives. That makes perfect sense. But it makes me sad to use it. And Trung is one of the few people, because Bilal mentioned this on a previous episode. It's like, what the fuck is up with these Twitter threads where it's like, there's, 7 billion people on the planet and they don't know how to breathe or like whatever. It's just like it's really low effort content. And that shit annoys me because like, in my sense, like every single episode of Founders Podcast, before I sit down to talk to the listener, I have to read an entire fucking book. Like that is the opposite of low effort. It's excessively high effort at times.
For the uninitiated, I just want to say for people, because sorry we didn't mention, we should have mentioned on top. So David has done, I think, 250 episodes now.
280. He's done
1,000 to go. 1,000 to go.
Yeah, exactly.
So he has a mission to do like 1,280 or 1,300.
No. I'm gonna never stop. Like I will
he
stop
just says
recording.
that's for people who don't know. That's your last line, which I love. Yeah. I want to talk about this after as well. But go on.
Well, that's actually we can jump right into it real quick, and I want to come back to the fact that I actually like Trunk's threats. Like I learn a ton. Like me and him, I was texting him the other day about the sriracha guy. Like that's my favorite one. Yeah, it's fucking incredible. What I put at the end, I was like, okay, like I'm doing a 2-part series on Kobe Bryant right now, right? That'll come out in the next couple of days. And I think that's like, 272 or 273. I had some, like a bunch of unnumbered bonus episodes. But anyways, so what I'll do is like, that's 273 books down, 1,000 to go. It's not people like, oh, you're going to stop at 1,273. It's like, no, if you listen to them, I've been saying 1,000 to go for hundreds of episodes. It's Jeff Bezos.
I've been pretty confused. I'm not going to lie.
You were like, is he not doing the math here? What's going on?
Like, bro, what do you mean you have 1,000? I just listened to 113 and 212 and what are you moving the goalposts or what's going on?
So it's my version of Jeff Bezos's day one idea.
Yeah.
which I know I was just listening to an episode on the drive yesterday where you guys talk about when one of the times Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs met at in the conference center for the or in the like the hotel by the San Francisco airport for the Segway, and that the way Steve approaches meetings is consistent because I've read like a dozen books on Steve. I have like almost 20 something episodes like on or about people that work with him, but the way he like big brothered Jeff Bezos. But anyways, the point is Jeff has this great idea where it's like, it's always day one. It's day one of the internet. He's been writing about that in his shareholder letters forever. In fact, when they built the new Amazon headquarters, the main building is called Day One. And his whole point is just like, once you get to day two, it's like stasis, irrelevance, and death. Exactly. So it's like, the way I look at it is, I stole this from Conor McGregor, and I repeat it on the podcast all the time because it comes up in all these biographies I'm reading. It's like a lot of people, they start something, they get really good at it, and then they confuse themselves and like, oh, I'm great. And it's like, no, people pay attention to you because of the work that you put in. And you see this in fighting with Conor McGregor. He says, if you go to sleep on a win, you wake up with a loss. And so that at the end, even though I'm saying it out loud to you, the listener, it's a reminder to me. It's like, okay, you did 273 books. Who gives a fuck? You got 1,000 more to go. And you did 274, you still got 1,000 more to go. Like you cannot go to sleep on a win or you're going to wake up with a loss.
All right. So you're not bad at math. Like we're just confirming that.
I am bad at math, actually.
You can do basic arithmetic. Well, actually, so David, you mentioned that you didn't listen to our Sailor episode. Well, Sailor has said this on many podcasts, but you literally echoed like the main takeaway. Like the reason I even got him onto the podcast was he talks about this one idea that, listen, he's got a lot of ideas and some are just absolutely just out there, and
sugar cube powered Teslas is not one.
Sugar cube powered Tesla, and like we if you watch the video just for comedy, it's like we couldn't even respond. We were unable to respond. But but his thing was basically, if you are the best at what the world only wants to pay you for one thing. The world only wants to know you for one thing. As soon as you get good at one thing and you think you can do another, he's so blunt. He's like, you can't. Because if you start doing that second thing, there's somebody hungrier than you, more to lose, and they don't give a shit. They're going to take whatever you were doing as soon as you lose focus. So like, that was like the one thing from him from like a 2-hour plus chat. And I've heard him say that many times. So I specifically want to tee him up on that just for actually, the clipping.
Trung, on that idea, I do want to actually bring up one of the things I really like. So first of all, I think we kind of introduced what you do, but just to clarify for people, you should go subscribe to Founders Podcast. It's been one of my favorite podcasts since I've started listening to it recently.
I appreciate
you, like you said, you read the biographies, but not only that, you often like watch the speeches, you'll read all the shareholder letters, and you'll summarize this stuff. And I was saying to Trung in private as well that for someone like me, I can listen to audiobooks, I can read books, but I can listen to podcasts like 10 times more than anything else. Like if someone's reading a book to me, it's difficult for me to take it in. But when you're talking about it, it's like you're my smart friend who's just really excited about this idea, and we're at dinner and you're just telling me about all these cool ideas.
David,
and so
Bilal literally texting me. He's like, I cannot believe how excited David is about Jay-Z. He's like, this guy's so excited.
So good.
I'm glad you said that. And this is why I'm also going to miss that Jack's not here, because one thing I wanted to do as a fan of NIA is like, dude, I want to get on their podcast and I want to ask them how they think about their work, not just NIA, but everything that I know, Creator Lab, Trunk's newsletter, everything Jack is doing with Visualize Value and all the other things, because I'm on his email list too. So I see and read his stuff. The reason that I wanted to bring that up is because I'm fascinated, and you guys talk about like the creator economy a lot on here, which is like, though I know it's the word we have to use, which I hate that word. But I understand.
Tell me about it, bro.
Yeah, it's like
I started a podcast called Creator Lab before people were calling it creators, so that's why I'm pissed about it too.
The reason is because I'm always fascinated. It's like how when the person that creates it, and this comes up in the biographies over and over again, it's like I want to know how they think about it. And you just hit on, people are like, hey, I loved, episode whatever 215 or whatever it is. It's like, to me, the original genesis behind the idea is like, hey, it'd be kind of cool because I'm a big fan of like one person podcasts, like Dan Carlin, my favorite podcaster ever.
Hardcore History. It's the greatest podcast ever. It's not even a podcast. It's its own art form.
He's the reason that I do it the way I do it, with the one person, right? Bill Burr, Monday Morning Podcast, has been going on. That's one of the longest running consecutive podcasts in history. Like he's been doing it for like 12, maybe 15, like from the beginning. And it's just a dude. When you listen to Bill Burr's Monday Morning Podcast, it's like, oh, this really funny friend of mine is just telling me the shit that's in his mind. and it's very like low production value. It's just like, it's completely authentic. And so the way I think about founders is just like, the idea was like, hey, what if you could meet up? Because I do this shit, like if you were to have dinner with me, it's just like, I'm going to tell you about the stuff I'm reading or the stuff I'm thinking about, right? So it's like, what if you could meet up with your friend who reads a lot once a week, and he just tells you the shit he learned this week in the book that he read, right? And then the way I look at it is like, that was the main idea. And then as it progressed, I'm like, oh, these aren't separate episodes. Like we have to use the word episodes because that's the terminology within podcasting, right? But to me, it's like right now, I think I have like 400 and some hours out there of audio content. It's like one giant 400-hour long conversation on the history of entrepreneurship. That's why when you listen to it, it's just not like when I just did this episode of Kobe Bryant, it didn't just keep it to Kobe. I'm like, oh, Kobe said this, and that was like what John D. Rockefeller said, or this is what Michael Jordan thought about this, or like this is Sam Walton did the exact same shit. And so that's the whole thing, is like tying this all together, and it's just like it's not separate. Now, I'm not going to drop a 400-hour audio file. So it makes it easy if you just follow along in episodes. Yeah.
Until you redefine what an audiobook looks like.
Well, I was telling David that I'm listening to the Harry Truman autobiography by David McCullough. The audiobook is 60 hours. I'm like at 2x speed. It's still 30 hours. Like I'm never going to finish this thing. Yeah. But having said that, you're 10 times that. So you have 400 hours of audio.
Yeah. And the one thing that I love about, and the fact is why like I'm obsessed with podcasts. I'm obsessed with podcasts. I'm obsessed with podcasters, and I'm obsessed with like the business models of podcasting, which we could also talk about too, is because like in some degree, a lot of the people that get so good at what they do that somebody wrote a book about their life, which is kind of crazy, right? It's a lot of them were also, not only did they start companies, but they started entire industries. And when I studied like the early railroad industry, the early technology industry in the San Francisco Bay Area, the early automobile industry, whatever it is, I see that exact same thing with podcasting right now. I'm like, oh, I've seen this before. And then what's fascinating too is like the same personality types, right? You guys talked about this on one episode. I don't remember what you said, but I remember what I thought. I'm like, oh, that person that may be into like Web3 now, or software as a service, or AI, or whatever, if they were American, living in America in 1900, they would migrate to Detroit and they'd be building cars, right? It's that same, it's just what is the skill set and the industry that's booming right now, where you just happen to be born in the place you're at. But
you're excited by that new stuff. Like we call it like edge of the internet stuff, but really it's just technology.
Well, actually, let's ask David. So I've never heard you talk about the business of podcasting. Maybe I haven't listened to enough of your podcasts, specifically.
I cut one of them. So I had, I read Masters of Doom. I didn't mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, let me.
No, the gaming book, right? About the creators of Doom, the game.
Yes. So when I read that book, it was fascinating because it's telling a very specific story, which is like you had these two founders, John Carmack and John Romero. John Carmack, they're both still operating today, but John Carmack, I think, became way more famous, right? And they were partners at one point, and they had completely different philosophies on how to build a company. But what I was so interesting is like they didn't like working for other people. They were game designers in a company. Then they started selling their own games. They're like, okay, what's the business model of games? And they realized there's a guy that approached them, and he took an idea from another industry, which is the main point of founders, right? It's just like history doesn't repeat, human nature does. Like you think everything is new, and it's just, if you read a ton of history, which I probably read at least 1,000 books on history by now, it's like, it's just the same story over and over again with different, like you just move out to the industries, you move out to people, you move out in some cases like the place they are in the world. And so the guy's like, hey, there was this industry in the early software industry, right? Called shareware. And this worked in B2B sales. You'd write a program, right? There was no like subscription software business at the time. So let's say you were a programmer in the 1970s, end of 1970s, early 1980s. You had a program that would benefit somebody's business. You would put it on like a disk or a CD. They didn't even have CD-ROM, so some kind of disk.
Floppies.
And you could either give it away or you could download it. I can't remember the exact mechanism there, but you give it away for free, and you'd say, hey, if you like it, send me a check. Here's my address. And you wouldn't believe how much money these people made in that with just that idea. So then they take that idea and they're like, okay, let's do that for games. This is John Carmack and John Romero, and the person telling them about it, I forgot the guy's name. And they like, here's the game. If you like it, send me a check. No one sends checks. Like nobody. And they realized the gaming was completely different than B2B. And so their innovation, when they dropped Doom, right? The people that made Doom think about the expenses they had, right? There's like 6 guys in their 20s. They had their computers, they ate pizza, they all lived in one house. The day they released Doom, what they would do is like, here's the first 15 levels for free. You could play it. If you want the next 30 or next 45, you have to pay us. They were bringing in, this is like early 1990s, if I'm not mistaken. They were bringing in over $100,000 every day. No middlemen. Like we talk about direct to consumer, which is a huge theme. I think you guys talk about all the time. Like they were doing that 30 years ago, dude. And imagine being 21, 22, 23 years old. It's you and your bunch of buddies. You're sitting in a house. You have no expenses other than pizza and rent. And you're just $100,000 today.
High margin.
$100,000 like 90. That was their point. And so when I read that book, I didn't know anything about podcasting. I was on episode 20, right? And I did like a 20 or 30 minute prologue or introduction of like, this is how this person makes money in podcasting. This is how they do it. I went and looked at all the main podcasters. Like, how can I make this? At the time, it was just like a passion thing. I didn't even think I was like, I couldn't figure out how to do it as a living, right? And so my point being is like, I've just been thinking about the business of podcasts every day for probably 6 years.
So how has that evolved, David? Like
when you first... Hold on. What are the conclusions?
There's an infinite number of ways. Like, I am the most bullish person on the biz. So I have to be careful what I say here because a lot of the conversations I have are in confidence. But if you do a podcast like Founders, like my friend Patrick, who does Invest Like the Best, me and him get along immediately and he understands it even more because he has one of the most valuable business podcasts in the world. Like if you could this is the thing, if you could put a valuation on Patrick's podcast, which is Invest Like the Best, it's an absolutely fantastic podcast. It would sound silly because it's just him and, a small team of maybe 2 or 3 people to help him with it, interviewing people. I can't like go into some of the stuff that's confidential, but like, if you could value that the way you value other businesses, like you're talking about, it's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And when I say that to people, they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like people think I'm crazy. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Podcasts are the best, not just like the best, they're fun to make and you can be obsessed. They're the best businesses in the world.
Wait, David, hold on here. Let me tease this out. Okay. So people can understand, like you can, when you go Spotify bought Joe Rogan for $200 million or for 3 years, people can get that.
Didn't buy.
Yeah. He owns it. After 3 years, he gets it all back and do whatever he wants. Or he can choose to stay on the platform or go back and go to RSS feeds and go everywhere. So they had this exclusive for 3 years for whatever, 200 million, call it. But you can kind of people can make sense of that because he's literally the biggest podcaster in the world, right? He's bigger than CNN. He's bigger than Fox. I think whatever, 11, 12 million an episode. That's the size of Fox, MSNBC, and CNN combined.
Right? Yeah.
So people can grasp that.
And they're like 3 hours long, by the way, which is another thing on like depth versus just, views. You know
so
what I mean?
I think that people can grasp. For a lay person that may not be as deep into the podcast game as you, can you tease out why? Maybe not necessarily invest like the best, but you touched on one point. The audience is so valuable. The audience is so valuable.
Joe Rogan was a perfect example to bring up there because this ties into the conversation I had. Can I go run and get a book real quick?
Yes.
Give me 1 second.
Just do it. We need one of my favorite while he's gone. One of my favorite podcasts is the Ask Blog podcast. It's the Arsenal Askcast, it's called. And anytime like someone needs to go to the door or something, instead of like just editing out, they just play this going to the door music, and it's like, and it's like, I don't know why they do it, but it just works.
Like the Jack Benny, like,
yeah, exactly. And then they come back instead of just being like edited out. It's like kind of a funny little break. It's like radio people. All right, David. Sorry. What book you got for us?
Okay, so you couldn't have teed it up better. Okay, so this ties into the fact like, okay, what me and Patrick understand is like shows like Founders, shows like Invest Like the Best. Arguably, I don't know who's in your audience, but I highly suspect it's very similar. It's like what people don't understand is you're making educational content for the most successful people in the world. Okay, so that is where the shit gets real wild. Now, I'm going to tie this all into Joe Rogan too. And some of the stuff I'm going to keep secret because I have a bunch of secrets, right? Because I think about this all the time. And it's one of the main, you'll hear me repeat on the podcast all the time, bad boys move in silence. That's a maxim for when you have an edge, shut
A great philosopher said that, I think. Yeah.
It's actually Biggie Smalls. Yeah, I'm a huge hip hop fan. And so let me just tell you this, like, this happens all the time. Like, so I'm reading a book on Kobe Bryant. I'm not thinking he has this great thing. He's like, listen, the same dedication, the practice I did, the learning from the greats, the singular focus. He's like, don't copy the what, copy the how. He's like, you're not trying to be the best basketball player in the world like I am, right? But you could take the same ideas that I'm applying to my craft and apply it to yours, which is a main theme of Founders, right? So what I love is like Kobe Bryant's dad was in the NBA, right? And he is in many cases like the anti-Kobe. Like he would gamble, he would drink a lot of alcohol, he'd do cocaine, he'd get arrested.
They're living in Italy, right? They're living in Europe at the time.
The time he got arrested happened in Philadelphia. Because of this behavior is why he got bounced from the NBA, right? Because no one the last season, and I talk about this in the episodes coming up, his last season in the NBA, he's 20 years old, he's into prime, but like he stayed out all night gambling, lost all his money, didn't have any money for a cab, and so missed the game. Imagine Kobe Bryant doing that. Imagine Kobe doing that.
This is the Redeem Team. I don't want to cut you off. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No.
We'll talk
it's
about Raptors. Like, no. I'm just saying. I think after you drop this story, we should talk about, because it's on Netflix. I know a lot of people are watching it. The Kobe Bryant story from the Redeem Team is the complete opposite of what you just said.
Yeah. He said, I watched it and I took notes on to Bilal's point where like, I'm not only going to read the book. I watched the documentary, took notes on it, and I included that into the podcast too. So what was interesting is I'm reading this though, right? So this is the note. This is the note I left on myself on this page, right? So what I do is like, I go through the books, I underline whatever pops out, like whatever I'm most excited to talk about or like something interesting, right? And then I immediately write on a post-it note, like what else pops in my mind? And I go, this is what the early days of an industry looks like. If it works, the numbers always get there's like 17 A's, way bigger. And what does that mean? A few years, they could not believe that the Philadelphia 76ers signed Joe Bryant, right, which is Kobe's dad, to a contract making $300,000 a year. They're like, this is bullshit. It's never going to go higher. A few years before, the Chicago Bulls were struggling to pay Jerry Sloan $60,000 a year. So in a few years, it went from $60,000 to $300,000. They're like, this is just it has to stop. How like they make that more like players make that more to tie their shoes. Like, so when you study the early days of an industry, what you realize is like humans do the same shit over and over again. They say, like one, they always think they're late. Like, it's too late to be an NBA player. Or and then the second thing is like, they always think the numbers can't possibly get bigger. You guys talk about football, soccer to Americans, football to Europeans all the time on the podcast. How much money like do the top football players make in the world? Like, hundreds of millions, like their net worth is probably hundreds of millions or whatever the number is. So why does this tie in together with Joe Rogan? So based on the kind of podcast I have and the people in the audience, I get, and this is why some of the stuff I can't talk about, it's like, I find myself in weird rooms and weird conversations, which is fantastic because you meet people. Like I met somebody the other day that I'm going to talk to you about right now. And there's a great biography. It's one of my favorite autobiographies. It's a guy named Ed Thorpe. Ed Thorpe invented the first quantitative hedge fund, created the first wearable computer with Claude Shannon. I've talked about him on a million podcasts, so I don't have to like go over it here. But what was interesting to me is that when Ed Thorpe, who's also an investor, he has dinner with Warren Buffett. They're both in their late 30s. So they're like our age now, right? And he leaves the dinner and Ed Thorpe tells his wife, he goes, that man's going to be the richest man in America one day. Like, called it. He winds up starts buying Berkshire shares at like $900 a share, right? He's the first LP in Citadel. Like, Ed Thorpe is just an amazing person. It's episode, I think, 222 of Founders, if people want to learn more. But I had that experience like this the other day, where I get to meet somebody because directly result of the podcast. I can't say who it is. He's got an alien brain. I left. I call my wife and I go, I don't know what this dude's going to do because he's young. He's in his early 30s. I go, but he could do whatever he wants. And if he gets in the right situation, he's going to be the richest person. Like, he's going to be one of the richest people around. And what's interesting is like, he's managing a ton of money, like tens of billions of dollars, right? And he's behind a name brand that everybody knows, but I can't say. So when I was talking to him, I asked him the question. I was like, listen, you have an unbelievable amount of money. Your network is fucking ridiculous. Your brand name, no one's going to say no to you. So I go, I don't have any questions about what you're investing in, right? Because I'm not going to understand that shit anyways. But I want to know who tells you no. And he told me this story where there was a guy that came to him and that said, hey, I have $80 million I have 75 to $80 million. I want to give it to you to invest. And this other guy's like, he's like, I don't like want your money, but I want to know where you got the money. And the guy's like, oh, he has a private company. He goes, the last few years, he has a private company he has 100% of that is in like a no-name industry that makes products for other businesses. Okay, let's just put it that way. He goes, that's just been my personal dividend every year for the last few years. So this guy's living in the Midwest America, if I'm not mistaken. I might get the details wrong, but I'm not getting the details wrong about, I paid myself 75 million in dividends last year, 75 million the year before, 80 million, 75 million over and over and over again. And so the guy I'm talking to is like, all right, I don't want to, he goes, I want to buy into your company. And that guy who owns 100% of the company told him no. So that's the answer to your question. And so that wound up happening like 2 hours into our very long conversation. And I reference it like an hour later. And I'm like, listen, you just said it was super impressive, right? Because everybody always wants to know, like, why the hell are you so obsessed with podcasts? Like you sound like a fucking freak. Like this doesn't make any sense. And I go, you just got done saying that you thought it was very impressive that, and you so much so that you wanted to buy into the company if you could, of a private company making $75 million a year. How much do you think Joe Rogan makes on his podcast? I go, look, man, before he went over to Spotify, it was a team. It was him, Jamie, and they had one other guy. They were doing 190 million downloads a month, right? And so you can figure out, and some of this is public, right? And some of it's private, but like you can figure out, you can find out what Joe charges for an ad. You can see what's his ad load. You can multiply that number. Then you can add, then you know what Spotify paid him, right? And then you start adding this up and the number reported are different. You can, if you really want this information, there's ways to find it, is what I'm saying. But even if I'm shooting high, if you factor in the shows Joe sells out, how much Spotify pays them, the ad revenue, the fact that they launch other businesses they own a part of, like On It just sold for, hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever the case is. It's like, it's not unrealistic that Joe is going to be making 50, let's just call it 50 million a year from his podcast, right? That's now. That's because he's got the largest audience now, right? You think that we've peaked? Like you think in the future, if you're at the beginning of an industry, you're going to have a bunch of other podcasts that eventually get to 10 million, 8 million, 12 million. There is going to be no limit to how big they can get because what's the market constrained by, right? How many people speak your English or speak your language, which as you see with Mr. Beast, there's already people emailing me saying, hey, I'm going to dub and basically take Founders, put it in Spanish is the first one we're doing, right? Then Mandarin, then all this other stuff. So like that playbook's being run. What is the size of the audience? Well, how many people? And so when I think about Founders, people think I'm fucking crazy with how big I think I can get. I'm like, well, how many people are connected to the internet, speak English, and are interested in entrepreneurship? That's a giant fucking number.
I think Bilal totally agrees because I know Bilal is a huge part. Bilal, thoughts on everything David said?
No, I mean, I love it. I was just like listening attentively there because I, first of all, love the energy of it. And I know like I'm very bullish on podcasting overall. I will say like most things, there's going to be a distribution, obviously. And like right now, the distribution is like very skewed towards the top 0.1%. Like most things, but I think it's even more skewed right now, mainly because YouTube hasn't done what I think it should be doing and hasn't. I was actually just talking to someone at YouTube about it 2 days ago because they're working on trying to get more people to find and discover podcasts through YouTube. And right now, the discoverability problem of most podcasts is still limiting what it could be, in my opinion, for like the kind of mid-tail. But I 100% agree. If you just think of like influence, depth, time spent, and, like even on my tiny scale, when I meet people, at events or on the street sometimes, and they're, I heard your podcast about this, they'll tell me stuff so specific that I'm like, I don't even remember me saying that. Like someone was like, I know you ate 2 meals a day. That's fine. I'm like, what? When did I mention that? Or like your dad worked in KFC,
That's
and
totally
I'm like,
you're right to do that.
Yeah. And so like, I completely agree with what you're saying. But yeah, I'd love to hear you kind of expand on that a little bit. And I'm curious to get your, go on, Trung, you go first.
I want to jump on something that Bilal said. So Bilal does bring up a good point, David. I know you're a student in podcasts. This is the reality though. If you look at the top 20 podcasts today and then go back 10 years, they're kind of similar-ish. The top ones are still the top ones, right? You have NPR, you have Bill Simmons, you have Joe Rogan, and a bunch of comedy ones. So they've, like the top of the top But I think what's interesting, I would love to hear the contrarian take here, not necessarily contrarian, but like disabuse me of the notion that the top 10, 15, 20 hasn't really changed and that this is still infinite opportunity and everybody that has the wherewithal and the temperament for it should consider it.
Okay, so this ties into a book that I know you guys talked about on the episode where you talk about your favorite books and podcasts, the AMA episode, and why. Also, I said I was a big fan of Jack because it's one of the most important books, and I'm essentially just running the playbook. And it's the Almanack Naval by our friend Eric Jorgenson. Us three were talking about our friend Eric. We got to get back to that. We were talking about it before we started recording. We got to get back to that because what he's doing, the series that he's doing, like this idea is like take the distilled knowledge of really unique thinkers and put them into book form is a genius idea. And for him to do it, like he starts with Naval, then he's doing, I always call him Balaji. How do you say his name?
Balaji, I think. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So
Balaji, I think.
But if you talk to Eric, and I'm going on his podcast again tomorrow, and I talk to him all the time, it's like, oh, that's just step one, then step two. And like, he can do this for the rest of his life. And it's like going to start compounding. But one thing is like, one of the most important things in that book, and obviously Jack did fantastic illustrations for it. And something that I have everywhere, it's on my phone, it's on my computer, to remind why, like I work on Founders 7 days a week. I don't allow myself to do anything else. It's like, there's a line in that book that says being at the extreme in your art is very important in the age of leverage. Power laws rule everything around us, and most people don't even know what the fuck they are, right? And so like the best book to read on this is Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. Like he's going to talk about it over and over again. There's a great quote. I have like 20,000 highlights from all the books that I store. So I have also like a secret weapon. So I can pull this up right now while you guys are talking. And this is what Peter said. If you do start your own company, you must remember the power law to operate it well. The most important things are singular. One market will probably be better than all others. One distribution strategy usually dominates all others too. So none of like anything that's going to be valuable in podcasting or otherwise, like you have to aggregate people's, like people have to like it, right? There's a reason why Joe Rogan's is the most valuable podcast in the world, because over 12 years or however long he's been doing it, almost 2,000 episodes, like his media compounds, right? And so like he never interrupted the compound. But this is the same advice that like a Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett would give you. So there are podcasts that are relatively newer, right? That are not 10 years old. Like look at the top podcasts in the business category, right? One of them, I copied the format. So I got the format for Founders Podcast on this podcast from Jocko. It's called the Jocko Podcast. It is like always in the top category in business, top 10 podcasts. He's probably got millions of people listening to him, right? And before he launched this podcast, he didn't even have social media. He was in the Navy SEALs. He goes on Tim Ferriss's podcast. Tim's like, yo, you should start a podcast. Then he goes on Joe Rogan's podcast. Joe's like, you should start a podcast. Like, well, if you two are telling me, I should obviously do this. And so that's a relatively, like he's been doing it, I think, every week for like 5 years. So they do take a long time to grow, but like you can always get in there as long as you're not copying. Like that's why I think
which part of his format did you borrow? Because I know he does book reviews. So
exactly that. Like if you go to his early episodes, he still does it now. I mean, he's obviously busy, and we could talk about the business model podcast because what Jocko's doing is clearly the future. It ties into what you guys discovered of Ryan Reynolds, which I fucking loved. Jack broke it down, and again, of course, he's really great at like simplifying things down to like it's most important. But he said, like with the Ryan Reynolds thing, he's like he talked about the soccer team he bought or whatever, right?
Yeah, Wrexham FC.
He's like, think about from Ryan Reynolds' perspective, like you gotta like you have an agent, and then there's a company that wants you to endorse something, then you got to go back and forth, we agree on how much it costs. Here's what we want you to say. Or Ryan could just cut all that out and say, hey, I'll just buy the thing, and then I'll talk about it, and the value will go up. That is the end state for podcasts. That's exactly what you're seeing Mr. Beast do. Like all these creator-led brands. I fucking hate that word, but let's go with it because people understand. It's like, that's the end state, right? And so why do I think like a podcast like Patrick's or like mine? Well, because like the people, look at the people advertising on our podcast, right? They are enterprise. They build products for businesses. Every single person that pays to advertise on Founders is building products for founders, right? And so their lifetime value of a customer is unbelievable. And like the sweater I'm wearing, these guys, I had to wear this because this is a acquired podcast. My friends David and Ben. And I told David I was coming on here, and they're like, hey, Tell them I'll come on their podcast, by the way. I was like, dude, I'm going to wear your sweater.
It's incredible.
We should definitely have them. I like their podcast too.
Well, they're down to come on. So we've had a lot of conversations because there's a lot of overlap between founders and Acquire. But and they help shape my thinking on this as well, where it's just like the people advertising have excessively long, like high lifetime value of a customer. They pay an unbelievable amount to get to a very valuable audience, right? High net worth decision makers. Is essentially like if you're the founder of a company listening to founders and you hear me talk about something, you don't have to go and ask Barbara from HR or Joe from accounting. You're like, hey, we're going to use this. Like Barbara, you're the fucking decision maker.
Barbara, we love you, but we're cutting you out of this ad buying process.
You're the decision maker. And so my point is just like, what could you do? Well, like anything you want. Like what did Joe Rogan do for On It? He knew the people that are listening to Joe Rogan, they're really into fitness or really into supplements. So it's like, yeah, I could go read an ad read for a supplement company, or I'll tie this into Jocko right now. Or I could just start my own supplement company. I could come in and say, and I'm not mistaken, the deal was like, he gets, I think 30% equity. He's like, I come in for 30% equity, right? I get you your first 20,000 fucking customers. You run the business, you build it up over a long period of time. And then when there's an exit, I get a fat check for $50 or $75 million. Like you're already seeing, the playbook is already there. So what does Jocko do, right? Jocko, go listen to the end of his podcast. He doesn't take ads. Every single thing that he talks about, right, is a company that he owns. So it started out, I'm going to start a podcast because he was a best-selling author. So I want to sell books. So then he writes one book. Then he writes 2 books. Then he writes a series of children's books. The guy, I have like 5 of his books in my house spread out everywhere. But so the guy wrote probably like 15 books, right? He had a business that did leadership consulting, right? You know this. You guys are MBA,
it's a classic Navy SEAL, former general. McChrystal did one, and
how much do you think these Fortune 500 companies are paying him to show up for a week?
Easily 6 figures. Easily.
Bing. Okay, so his echelon front consulting business skyrockets, right? And now that they've heard him talk for hours. Like I've had an opportunity where I'm doing this too, where like I'm going to meet this guy. They're paying the CEO of a company that has like $200 billion worth of assets under management. He fucking loves my podcast. He's like, I just want an hour of your time and I want you to talk to my team, and they pay you whatever you ask for. You know what I mean? So like, but go back to Jocko. So he sells books, right? Then he starts his own publishing company, right? Then he does leadership consulting for Fortune 500 companies. He the story he told was hilarious. He's like, I want this book out by Christmas. They're like, it's impossible. He goes, I'll do it. So his publisher says, he's like, that's like, I really like his ethos in general. But I just love that idea. So then he has these other conference businesses, right? Which is like the Muster, which is, it's like $2,000, $3,000 a ticket. There's like, it's in a weekend. I think he sells like 500 tickets, something like that. You wake up at 4:30 in the morning, have like this group exercise class. And then during the day, it's leadership training, right? So then it goes on. Then he starts selling his own energy drink. Jocko Go. You go anywhere, like you go to Wawa, exactly. Go to Wawa, they're in there. You go to HEB in Texas, they're in there. You go to, I think they're just started selling them at Walmart. Then he's really into jiu-jitsu. So he talks about jiu-jitsu all the time on his podcast. So then he starts making American-made gis, right, for jiu-jitsu. Then they're like, hey, because he's ex-military, he's like super pro, like let's reshore and have like manufacturing. He's like, it's fucked up what they did. They took our manufacturing base and they moved it, because he's from New England. They moved out of New England and other places. They put it to China or other places just so they could, the owners of the company could make a couple percentage points more. So then he has a mission. He's like, we're going to bring manufacturing back. So he makes work boots, jeans, flannels, hunting, like every single thing that he's into, which is what, all the creators do. He's just like, okay, I'll just do it myself. And exactly what Jack said about Ryan. He goes, I'll just buy the thing or start the thing, and then I'll talk about it, and the value will go up. So what is the economic, sorry, and I just want to say, it is I want to go back to your original point about Naval. It is so prescient, what is leveraged in the 21st century: code, capital, and media. Like that. I remember that thread. I remember specifically, I ran a blog and the original name was onetrunna.com. And after I read Naval's thread, I just changed it to a Trung Phan. I'm like, want, like he says it right there. He's like, who has the most leverage?
people that put their name on it. Why is Oprah worth $5 billion? Because she's willing to lose her reputation and her name. People know that because her name's on it, that they trust her instinctively. Right? And she's done some crazy shit, man. Like if you look at the top 20 most successful Oprah episodes based on like views, they're crazy clickbait. Like
they used to be like Jerry Springer shit back in the day.
It's insane. It's like, oh, I married like my cousin, and like, I got engaged to a serial killer, like that type of stuff, right? But the whole point is like, all that gets washed away because people just trust her. So she obviously was like decades before, like, everything Rogan and Jocko and these people are doing. To your point, history just repeats itself. Oprah was already doing this shit decades ago, right? So she has her own network.
Not even that. Jimmy Buffett. Like Jimmy Buffett makes $50 million a year, right? The number I pulled out, I didn't get that from anywhere. It's like, because you read a breakdown of Jimmy Buffett, and it's just like, oh, he had a group, like he plays music, obviously. There's a group of fans, it compounds over time. And then he started selling his own weed. Like he's got strains of weed that are named after his songs. It's fucking genius. Like he has hotels, he has all the like restaurants, all sorts of stuff. So my point being is like why I start talking crazy and people think, David, you're fucking crazy. And I love that they think that, because I know I'm still early, is like what I just said. Like if Jocko's podcast is the one that launched all these businesses, and some of these businesses he's raised $30-40 million from, like these are going to be very valuable businesses, right? How much money would a company have to pay to have a distribution channel like that? And you're telling me that, yeah, he can't sell his podcast because it's him, right? But you're telling me that podcast is not going to be responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars of his net worth, assuming that he survives and he keeps it going? You're out of your fucking mind. You were absolutely wrong about that. Therefore, his podcast is worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Love it.
Fair.
I love it.
Can I ask a very specific question? I wanted to ask you about this because you think about podcasting as much as anyone. So I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but specifically as it relates to Jocko, I think personally, without knowing as much about his story as you do, YouTube probably played a big part in his growth, right? Is that right? Like he has a pretty good following on YouTube as well. He also went on Rogan. Rogan has a massive influence. He's got
clips that have been viewed over 10 million times.
Yeah, which is incredible. And like he's also, first and foremost, he's a great podcaster, right? Like he has a good product,
again, go back to the Naval thing. Like being at the extreme in your art is very important to age your leverage. Yeah. There's one Jocko. Like there's one David Goggins. There's one. You can't. That's why I keep saying, he's like, guys, why are you starting another interview entrepreneur podcast? Like that's been done, dude. Fine. The podcast is a medium. It is not a thing. It could be whatever the fuck you want. It could be some weird guy with a giant head like myself that reads all the time, telling you about what he reads. Like there's a million different things that you could do. Just experiment. Yeah. And dude, everybody's like Founders has been growing really rapidly, like the last few months, especially, but like they didn't see that like I've been doing it since 2016 and no one knew about it. Yeah. So now when people discover it, right, they're like, what the fuck? There's almost 300 episodes. It's like they, and you'll see this on Twitter. I get emails and messages. They're like, oh, it's not that they don't listen to one. They're like, I listen to one and another one. And then they go for like 10, 15, 20 hours. And by the time somebody, just like you guys, just like by the time somebody listens to you for 20 hours, you have a fan is going, because what happened is like, I don't listen to, or I actually watch NIA. It's always on YouTube. I don't watch NIA and then like cover my mouth and keep it a secret. It's, I tell people, like, I send the link. Hey, like I sent that Virgil thing that I tweeted at Trung the other day. It was one of your early episodes. I think it was like episode 17.
Yeah, dude, I'll be honest. I could not believe you pulled that out. Like, damn, that was an OG episode. Like I didn't,
because I've been listening or watching. But my point is, it's like, I can't tell you how many times I've sent that to so many people just because I'm like, dude, listen to these guys break down his, and then how he learned how to do it. And like the change 2% and like all that shit. And so that's what happened. And then what happens if you keep doing it over and over again and you never quit? Then instead of having 10, at the beginning, you'll have 10 people sharing your stuff. Then, a little bit longer, now you'll have 1,000. And then eventually it's just, in Joe Rogan's case, millions of people spreading his content for free.
100%. And then, sorry, just to follow up on that point, kind of what I was saying before, how do you specifically think about YouTube for your future podcast plans? And I'm curious, is it just more, I want to put clips up there, I need to create a video experience that's as good as the audio experience? Like, I'm just curious to get your take on that, because personally, I think YouTube is the biggest growth driver for, future-proof in your, like, discoverability and reach, but it's not made right now for podcasts. And you're basically competing with a 10-minute video from Mr. Beast where they spent $5 million and they've taken every single thing out. And the algorithm is all about retention and watch time. And so I was speaking to them this week about that. There's NPR and these massive podcasts who get millions of downloads on audio. They put it on YouTube and they get literally 300 views. And the reason for that is because the way the algorithm works is not designed for a 2-hour piece of audio content. So I'm just curious how you think about that, kind of like looking forward.
For the listeners, Dave just like stroked his chin. He's
about to go in.
No.
I've been thinking about this guy for 4.5 years every single day.
No, so a lot of this information I don't even know. So like the good thing is, if just like Trung, right? Like I consider Trung an expert. Like one of the things in the Kobe Bryant book, and that happens a lot, is no. But like Kobe is always talking about like the importance of like identifying your weaknesses and then constantly finding people that fix those weaknesses. And so he had like a defensive weakness he couldn't figure out. So what does he do? He goes and grabs Gary Payton and Gary, he's like, Gary, how do I like, he calls it like moving your puppies or something like that. Like basically like how do you slip through screens and all the other shit they talked about in the book. But like the benefit of having a podcast that people get value out of is you can ask for help. And usually those people are like world-class. So like the first time me and Trung ever talked, we talked for like 2 hours on the phone, right? We have like the same interests. We have the same mentality. But like Trung is just schooling me on the game because it's like, I don't know shit about Twitter threads. I don't know anything about LinkedIn. I have all these atomic pieces of content. Trung, what should I do with them? And like, because like I listen to his podcast, he listens to mine. He just gives like the amount of how much would people pay if Trung put that in a course, what he told me in an hour, right? Literally, you should pay thousands of dollars for it because it's worth that. Like his fucking knowledge on how to gain attention on these two platforms in particular, like if done well, think about all the doors and opportunities that have been opened up because you figured out how to get attention on Twitter. Like you're talking about your Twitter feed is worth millions of dollars, even if you can't technically sell it, you know? So yesterday I had a long conversation, like 2 hours. I can't say who it is, but he's a general manager of a podcast that is gigantic. Everybody knows who it is, what the podcast is.
I just want to say is this: the fact that the podcast has a GM is when you know it's big, right? Joe Rogan ain't got a GM on his podcast, but I'm just gonna throw it out there. Can I? I'm not gonna say it, but I'm guessing.
I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not like.
Don't even have a reaction. Okay,
like,
actually, here. I'm just gonna. I'll melt it to Bilal.
Well, I'll tell you off screen. But point is like. And
Real G's moving silence like lasagna. That's another hip hop line for you. Yeah. To just let you know, I got the original reference.
And so I don't have a YouTube strategy. I don't even have a presence there. I am going there. And that is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to this person. So let's just put it that way. And they are as bullish as you are, Bilal. So I have some other weird things that I have ideas of. I told Trung and I'll share this because I don't think I tell people and they don't do it. So it's whatever. I just had this weird thing where I was like, okay, I understand why everybody does clips because it makes sense. You guys already have the video. You could hire somebody at, $5,000 or $10,000 a month and they'll do like, I get these emails all the time. Like, they're like, let me clip your show. I'm like, what? I don't even have video. I will have video because I'm building a studio and I have other ideas I want to do. And I may just do it in like, I have a soundproof phone booth that I actually record in. Is actually stuck because I'm moving. The reason like we had this conversation before we started where I just had a weird 48 hours. I literally stopped moving 30 minutes before we got on this call. But it's so difficult to like take apart. You have to hire a company that does it because it's like soundproof and everything, and they can't get here. So I'm recording out in the middle of like my living room right now.
It sounds still good though. Don't worry, man. That sounds good, dude.
I appreciate that. So even then, like I might just do video in that booth because when I make TikToks, everybody's like, it leaves comments. So like, why does it look like this guy is laying on the floor? Because it's like, it's soundproof. It's like, I did it because the audio quality. So anyways, what I realized is like, okay, you learn history, like you study history. It's like, oh, we're just mimetic. Like we just copy each other. Like we don't actually think, we just copy. And we can think about a handful of things, but we can't think about everything. So we have to copy. I copy too. I'm not immune to that. And so I talked to a bunch of other podcasters. I'm like, everybody saw how important YouTube clips. Bilal, I'm going to answer your question in a long roundabout way. Like, what was Joe Rogan's primary growth mechanism? It wasn't his RSS feed. It was the fact that yes, he interviewed celebrities or people that had large followings in some cases, and they would tweet, here's this new episode, and that makes a big difference. Or they Instagram it, that makes a big difference, right? But he said at one point, I think he was getting like 50% of his downloads from YouTube. And a huge driver of that was not only the full episodes on YouTube, but he was doing clips. He's one of the first people, a big podcast, to do clips. And he was one of the first podcasts to actually do video. At the beginning, they didn't consider if you did video for a podcast, they had like specific definitions like, oh, it's not a podcast, it's an internet show or whatever. That has completely disappeared. Like anybody even bring that up. And so what happens? Everybody starts doing clips. Makes sense. Okay, if you guys are videoing this, why not? Like, yes, go pay somebody to do it or whatever, do it yourself.
We haven't.
Yes, I know you haven't. Me and you have talked about, me and Trung talked about this because I was like, bro, I got a ton of ideas for you. And so, because there's ideas, even though I know you guys cover like current affairs and current events and news, there is like evergreen shit in your back catalog. The Virgil design thing is one of them. That part on Ryan Reynolds, that's one of them. Like that's valuable if you listen to it now or you listen to it 2 years from now. So anyways, I'm talking to like, okay, why are you guys doing clips? I'm like, oh, because that's how you grow. And then I'll ask like, it has to, right? But I'm like, how many new podcasts have you discovered through a clip? And every single person I've asked that question, like, no. Like, where do you find other podcasts? Like from other podcasts or my friends tell me, right? Those are the primary growth of podcasts. It's they build cult-like followings and people in a cult won't shut up about it. Whether it's CrossFit, veganism,
dude, that's a great point, actually. You're 100% right. Everything I've picked up recently has been word of mouth.
Yes.
Definitely word of mouth is always the number one. Yeah. I will say, just to add to your point though, I will say, speaking to other people, that clips have helped them like get in front of new people, but specifically when they've built, like Trung, who's built a great Twitter following, or Andrew Schultz was doing, I mean, he's been doing podcasts for ages, but he has a Instagram following where most people just know him for like his Instagram funny little things. Then they'll put in the clips and then people are like, oh, I didn't even realize you have a podcast. And like if 100 people see it, 3 of them might go subscribe. So it's just all upper funnel like awareness nuanced. Essentially.
What I'm saying, it's very like, I'm not saying they're not valuable. I'm saying like, what is the reason they're doing it? And for people who are like, hey, I want more people to listen to the full episodes. That is the reason for a podcast, right? And so I'm like, okay, yes, it has to. It's like, but my point was like, okay, I'm going to test other shit because again, we're in the very beginning of a new industry. Like there is way more unknown unknowns than known knowns in this industry. Like for sure. So like, let's experiment. So I told Trung this idea. I was like, okay, well, I don't have any clips because I don't record video yet, but I have like crazy, like I have this database of 20,000 highlights from, I've read 100,000 pages, 200 something books. Like that's insane. I can repurpose that. And so you've seen me do that on Twitter and those things kill on Twitter. Like my Twitter following has doubled in the last month. Like I'm getting millions and millions of views. I have no business doing that considering I only have, I think 18,000 followers or something like that. But I had like half that, 45 days ago, or whatever it was. And so like the amount of impressions I'm getting in the growth, like that will clearly like compound and I'll never be as big as Trung or maybe even Jack, but like I'll be bigger than I am now. Right.
You might, and man. You might, bro.
But Trung's like, dude, start doing threads. Like, and he's even like, oh, 2 to you. I'm like, bro, you know how much, like I have notes. I'm not kidding, Trung. Before we knew each other, one of my notes to do was like, DM Trung, offer him $5,000 to write a Twitter for that information. I swear to God. Like,
well, dude, I mean, this is what you're saying is like, you understand. I've seen the clips you have from Readwise, I believe, those little quotes you put on your Twitter.
Yeah.
So, basically every single one of those could be a thread because you could turn it into a 3-act narrative, right?
Yes.
Because you have all the context. But those are, and you've talked about going to TikTok because actually you see a lot of like viral TikTok stuff. People rip me on TikTok. It's like very simple.
They literally do the green screen and they're showing your tweet.
Yeah, and the narratives, or also they could just do nice graphics. But like, the one thing I'll say about it is like I get like we talked about on the phone and talked with Bilal also. People just don't understand because threads have gotten such a bad name. But people have, I get it. But like, man. Blogs as a medium or newsletters as a medium. Yeah, there's shit anything, right? There's shit podcasts, there's shit videos. Like, doesn't matter about the medium. It's like how it's used. And the Twitter threads are getting abused. It's what Twitter incentivizes. But people have no idea how much effort I put into a Twitter thread.
I do. Yeah. Okay. But it's obvious. Like, that's why I always say it's like that's why I didn't do them because I've written a couple in the past. I'm like, oh, this is terrible because I'm seeing what Trung can do now as opposed to I'm sure your first through like anything. Like your second,
you just
third,
get better. Yeah.
Like even now, you're on episode what, 70? How many episodes you guys done?
I think we're 80
This
something.
is 82.
Yeah.
But including the episode 083. So yeah.
Yeah. So like
they all count.
I go back and listen to them. And I'm shocked that people even like it because I hear it. I'm like, episode 73 sucks, dude. I got to reread that book. But it sucks. It doesn't suck by itself. It sucks compared to what you can do now. I'm almost 300.
Right.
Just like 300 is going to suck when I get to 3,000. So it's like anything else. What I wanted to tie that together is like, so what I experimented with was like, okay, let me just go directly to what I want them to do. I want them to see this TikTok. I want them to see this tweet. I want them to see whatever piece of content I'm doing. And I want them to follow me in the podcast player, right?
That's all
if you
want.
If you look at Trung's posts on LinkedIn, it's all the same. It's like, listen, I'm glad you like this. That's how I got your attention. But what I really want you to do is follow my newsletter, right? Subscribe to my newsletter. So the podcast version is just like, dude, here's my pod link. Just follow. And then from there, the podcast will do all the work and convert them, right? And so what I did, and I told Trung this, was like, dude, the same shit I put on Twitter, right? Or LinkedIn too. I just filmed myself in my little booth, my little soundproof booth that I don't have today. I just filmed myself reading that quote from the book or from whatever, right? So I did one on Mark Andreessen. Mark Andreessen is super famous now. He invented a lot of people credit him with inventing the Twitter thread, which he called a tweet storm. And I don't know, remember this is years ago.
I do remember this.
Yeah. And so way before he was, and why did he do that? Because everybody knows he invented the first widely used web browser. They know him from A16Z and all this other stuff. But what I didn't know, right, and I'm a huge fan of his, is he was a prolific blogger. So for like 4 or 5 years, he wrote a blog and you can download, he took it off the internet, but if you go to his website on A16Z, you can download his blog archive. So they put a PDF, it's a 200-page PDF of his best post, right? I read that in June 2018, if I'm not mistaken, right? It's episode 50 of Founders. I read it. I did a podcast on the 200 pages and stuff. People love that episode. I don't know why. It's because it's Mark, most likely. My point being is like, I went and found an old highlight from literally, it's a paragraph from the show notes of that episode, which comes from an idea that Mark had. I filmed myself 10 minutes from the time I set up my iPhone, record myself reading, hey, Mark Andreessen is a billionaire investor and invented the web browser or whatever. Here's what he said about X. I don't even remember what I said at this point. And I read it, right? Then at the end of like the 20 or 30 seconds, I go, hey, if you want more, I read his 200-page blog archive and I did an episode on the key ideas. Go listen to episode 50.
How did it drive? How did it convert?
Hundreds of thousands of views. And it gave me the most downloads on a single day that did not have a new episode.
Oh, new reach. Right. Wow.
You can go back. So that was my point. But my point is like, it's not just enough of, hey, let's copy what other podcasts are doing. Let's say, why are we doing this? We're not doing this. The problem is a lot of people put up clips and a vast majority are just watching the clips and never going to your podcast. Right. Yeah. But your CPMs, and I don't sell on a CPM basis, but like the reason podcasts are valuable is because people will pay more for a podcast ad than a YouTube ad or than some other ad on another, like the amount of money on like per content basis, like podcasts have extremely high ad rates. It's basically a long-winded way of what I'm saying. So it is my interest to get them the fuck off TikTok or Twitter or anything else. And it's in their interest because I legitimately think it's impossible to listen to founders and not be better at your work. Like this is history's greatest entrepreneurs. You think they spent 60 years building a company and discovered nothing that was valuable? You're fucking crazy. Like that's fucking nonsense. So my point being is like, it's not, hey, what is everybody else doing? It's like, what am I trying to do? I just want more people to listen to founders. And so on anything I'm going to do, people are like, hey, but you make TikToks, hey, you make tweets. I don't give a fuck about any of that. I care about podcasts as a medium.
Same.
And so that's the way it's like, so that was one of the secrets where it's just like, dude, it's one thing to put a clip up there, but if you just look at the camera and say, hey, if you want more, go here. And then you guys can go in your dashboard and see, did that result? When I pushed them to a podcast I did 4 years ago, did the download spike or not? And how do you know it's working? Because the downloads on that episode went up.
Yeah. 100%.
There's something I had pinned here. I want to circle back quickly. And then I know we could probably head on to some individuals because you did give secrets. You said you weren't going to give secrets. You just give an hour worth of secrets.
No, well, I told those people, like I've told even you, like Trung would kill on TikTok because he's funny. I'm not funny. Trung like has me dying laughing. Like, and that's one thing I like about NIA. You guys laugh. Like, it's not like we're super serious. It's like, I have another idea for you. I wanted to convince you guys to do this daily.
Laugh track? Laugh track?
No, like you know Dan Levitard?
Damn.
Yeah,
you know Dan
Levitard.
Okay, so like he's got a sports show, but it's like not really a sport. It's tangentially about sports, but it's like funny, and they have like memes, like meme of the week, fun fact, fam, all this other shit. And it's like, yo, and look what happened. I think DraftKings or somebody like that just paid him $50 million for his podcast, like just for to be the presenting sponsor. I go, listen, how much money does CNBC make, right? And their audience is relatively small. Like Pat McAfee, you know, has a daily sports show. His contract, I think, is $30 million a year with I forgot one of these gambling people. But like, I'm like, so when I see shit like this, I'm like, okay, somebody's going to do that. It's like, fuck ESPN, Sports Center, like we're in suit. It's like, no, an authentic sports show, right? Which is a Pat McAfee or Dan Levitard, right? Some of it's like goofy and funny. I go, somebody needs to do that for business. And if they do it for business, it's going to be a podcast. It's going to be available in podcast form, and it's going to be available on YouTube. Somebody's going to crack that. They're going to do an hour or 2 hour show every day.
And probably a live stream.
And Microsoft or Salesforce or some other giant enterprise company is going to come around and say, hey, I'll give you $20 million a year to be your presenting sponsor. That is,
David,
that is fucking inevitable.
Let me do a David SENRA move here from the Founders Podcast and just keep calling back to things we talked about.
Just so you know, I called you the human Rome research when you
You're the human Rome research. For the listeners or viewers that they don't know, Rome is like this note-taking tool that they do backlinks. So everything is linked.
You like link all the ideas. Yeah.
So David said earlier, I'm pulling a David move here. Yeah, this reminds me of 30 minutes ago on this podcast. So David said, what makes his type of content invested like the best so powerful? It's you're making content for the most valuable decision makers in the world, right? But this is the value of CNBC. And even though no one watches and actually listens to CNBC, it's on all the time on every single trading floor. Any corporate office is just on, right? Yep. It's just there. And this is why Jack Welch bought NBC Universal. He's like, I have to have CNBC. I'm reading a book called Lights Out right now. It's about GE and the downfall of General Electric. And I did just have the whole part about CNBC. And Jack Welch is like, I need to have CNBC. But to your point, the problem with CNBC is this. And I've probably blacklisted myself from CNBC because I put a tweet out. I don't know if you guys saw this, but I made fun of how I prepared for a segment and they haven't asked me back since. The segment basically said, how to prepare for CNBC. And what I'd done was they'd asked me to come on, and all these shows, old cable shows, I mean, listen, CNBC is a monster, but they email me, it's like, hey, we need to know your 5 positions on this topic. And I'm like, 5 positions? Like I have no positions. Like, yeah, we need it though, because whatever your positions are, we're going to find something to do the opposite, right? Classic cable, Fox News, like, well, let's just get these guys bannering and no real information is actually exchanged. And so I actually did something where I just like Googled online. It was actually an old NIA episode. Somebody clipped it. And then I'm like, oh, screw it. I took that clip where I basically said I Googled the answer and then I went on. And that's literally what happened. I Googled the answer, read the first paragraph verbatim, just like regurgitated it on air, but it sounded really good doing it. But then I combined those clips and I haven't been back on CNBC since.
That was good. That was a great visual as well.
But you guys are a news source. Like, I don't pay attention to, like, all I do is read old books because that's my edge, right? If I'm saying, hey, being at the extreme of my art in the age of infinite leverage, there can't be like Founders by David SENRA and then like, you know, something kind of close to it. Like I have to go so fucking deep and spend all of my time and not like Eric Jorgenson. We got to get to him because we're all friends with him. And he always texts me and like, he's like a hype man. He's hilarious because like, he's just super nice dude. And it's crazy because like, I read his book and loved it before I knew who he was and before we were friends. But he's like, dude, you're the most focused person I know. Because he's just like, hey, do X. I'm like, I'm not doing anything but Founders. Like, I'm not fucking doing anything because why? And I tell him, I go, because it's your book. Your book is the one that gave me that idea. Like, I have to be in the extreme. You can't, to Michael Saylor's point, which again, I'm never going to watch the interview, so I have to take your word for it. But like, he is right in the sense that like, it's arrogant to think that you can compete and be the best in the world at something, which is Naval's whole point, that keep redefining what you do until you're the best in the world at it. And like the internet has massively broadened what constitutes a career. And still most people don't know that, right? So like I keep narrowing it and being extremely narrow to where it's like, listen, I don't care about anything else. I don't care about current events. I'm not jumping in anything, but I have to have the world's best podcast on the history of entrepreneurship. Luckily, there's not very many podcasts on the history of entrepreneurship anyways. So it's not like I have a bunch of competition. But my point is like, I look at NIA as like, you guys are a news source. Like, I don't know anything that's going on in the world. I watch you guys every week and I learn all kinds of crazy shit. Like, I know nothing about Web3, but Jack knows a fucking ton of it. So like all that shit that happens, I'll remember you guys talked to the dude. That's the one interview I watched. The Tom guy who sold The Rock for like $1 million.
Oh, Tom Osmond.
Yeah,
legendary episode.
So that episode is fantastic because he mentioned this fantastic. It's in the show notes of your show, if I'm not mistaken. But it's this post called Aliens, Jedi, and
Rick Burton. He talked about a strike. So Rick Burton.
Okay, that's a different
Burton.
person.
Rick Burton.
Both
He's
legends,
with the ETH Foundation, and he had written about
and Stripe,
meeting Vitalik and meeting Patrick Collison and the Collison brothers.
Okay, you're right. That's what I found out. Richard Burton. It's on Medium. It's Aliens, Jedi, and Cults: A Mental Model for Potential.
Incredible article.
But my point is, like, I would have never found that if I wasn't watching your show. Now I send that essay as if I wrote it. I don't here. I obviously send Rick's link, but it's just like I've sent it to so many freaking people because that's exactly the same shit.
That's his Thorpe line. He said he walked out of the meeting, the Collison brothers, like, these guys are gonna be billionaires.
Yeah,
that's exactly what he said.
The exact same ideas that he realized from being early in all these very important internet movements, I see in like the history of entrepreneurship. It's the same idea. And so my point being is just like, you guys, I think My First Million is another candidate for this. It's just like somebody's going to nail the funny, I'm laughing while I'm watching NIA, but I'm learning. And if you guys did that every day, and I'm telling you, like that's going to happen because you already see it on cable. Like you're already seeing something. It just needs to be internet native by people that are actually internet native. You three are internet native as a motherfucker.
David, I will let you in on a little secret. Thanks for all that feedback, first of all. But I will say we have talked about it, and we've talked about doing a live stream. Like maybe this is maybe a year ago though, like 9 months ago. We talked about maybe we can do a live stream same time every day, and like maybe it'll be a short show, but we can like pull in all the stuff we're doing. It's complete. But the way you described it was even better, which was just like comparing it to like a TV show. We won't even think of it like that.
Or no, just what you guys do now.
Yeah, but just doing
every
it
day.
Every day.
In the beginning, I guarantee you can find a presenting sponsor. You can go, like, I have some companies in mind that might work. But even if not, like, okay, so you started out, right? And I don't know your workload. Like, it's easy for me to say, hey, go do a bunch of work. But I was like, okay, so we'll just plug our own stuff. Like, plug your podcast, plug your newsletter, plug your courses, plug whatever, every single thing. Like, you guys do it like gingerly, you know? Like, that's the one thing I would do differently. Is like, I'm default aggressive. So I'd be like, you're listening to NIA for an hour. You better be subscribed to my other show. Yeah. You better be following me on my email.
I think we were saying like a pump your bag segment is like probably one we should just always have, even if it's a joke. Like we can think of a funny one to plug. But
I'm launching a new private podcast feed that's related to something else I'm doing, and so like I've made individual episodes that I'm not selling ads on because I'm taking the ads for myself. And so I'm like, hey, I just spent 15 hours reading this book. I made this thing. It's brought to you by me.
Yeah, completely.
David, I think you actually, to Bilal's point, you probably appreciate why we actually decided not to do the daily. And we know that somebody will get a big bang doing that. It was a focus thing because we knew realistically we wouldn't probably be able to put the time in that it would require. Not to say that it won't never happen, but that's what we decided a year ago. So, holy crap, we've been talking about the podcast. This is for an hour.
Yeah, I mean, this is why
I know.
One of the things I love about your show is like you break down how other people are building businesses in the age of the internet.
Yeah, dude, this is great. Yeah, this is very on brand. I know we had to talk about Jorgenson. Bilal, is that what you wanted? Because I actually wanted to hit David up with a bunch of a couple of his bio people.
Yeah, and I was actually going to pull up one quote. I only have one here from one of your pods, and we can then go into some of the ones we had in mind, like Bourdain, Jay-Z, and others. But it kind of comes back to both the point you guys were talking about focus. Michael Saylor's focus, David, what you're doing, like you're insanely focused. But I will say one that kind of resonated with me was in your Socrates episode. And it was something along the lines of this. You said, a champion wrestler became a well-known philosopher. Playwrights and historians became generals, and generals historians. Poets became statesmen, and politicians wrote plays, An architect might find a colony, and a man who made lamps might rule the city. And like what I loved about that was just as someone who's interested in many things, and like even if I look at my own career in life, like not just work, but just fun stuff I get obsessed by. I'm like both of you, I'm like very obsessive. And so like I can see even just little chapters in my only 30 something years of living that I've had like 4 or 5 years. Like I've done the podcast since 2015, and it's to be honest, it's been like right at the beginning I was like super motivated going ham, and then I took on another job and I took a little seat back, then I went ham again. And so I kind of do this like sprinting and resting thing, and then even in my personal life there's like sports, I just get really crazy into it. And then there was a time where I was writing and performing for a few years. So it's like, I'm curious, as someone like yourself who's insanely focused, what was it that made you pull this thread out in the first place? Because I think a lot of people listen to this might kind of find it interesting.
So one thing I have to say, like, there's no like one size fits all. Like you have to like Charlie Munger has this great line where he's like, follow your natural drift, right? Like be who you are. Like he started practicing as an attorney. He's like, I fucking hate this. Like, I don't want clients. He's like, I'm not making any money. And so I say it's like, follow your energy. Right. And so I think there's a ton of people out there that would find just doing one thing for an incredibly long period of time unbelievably boring. And like, that doesn't make sense for you to take advice from anybody, whether it be Socrates, Steve Jobs, or anybody in between. If it just doesn't, you have to apply it and like mold it to who you are. So I am an incredibly obsessive person, and I crave simplicity, right? And so the whole thing Steve Jobs was you guys pointed out, where he's like, why the fuck do you have 2 versions of a Segway? He's like, have one. That came, but he said that his whole life. So like, there's this book called Insanely Simple, which is written by a guy that used to run advertising for Steve, and they call it getting hit with the simple stick. So like, he'd come to a meeting and they'd be like, here, Steve, we have 2 different boxes for this product. And Steve's like, no, we don't. Like, we have one box. He's like, take that other box and throw it away. Right. And so that, and another idea I learned from Steve is like, the further you get away from one, the more complexity you invite in. I don't want complexity. Like I crave simplicity, and yet I make my life complex over and over again. I think all humans do. So for me, it's just like, I want one thing I can pour all of my energy into, right? Everything. But people like Socrates, I just did a 2-part series on one of probably the most important American in the connection of science and technology, this guy named Vannevar Bush.
Yeah, I saw those. He ran the War Department of Science.
Well, he was a founder of Raytheon. He was an inventor. They said like, if there's 2 Americans that died during World War II, that'd be the most detrimental to the Allied effort. The first one would be FDR, and the second one would be Vannevar Bush. But he talked about this too, and my hero Edwin Land talked about this too, where it's like, even if you focus on one thing, don't be so narrowly what's the word? Starts with an S.
Myopic, or like
no, it's like
inflexible, stiff.
I don't remember the name. Essentially, they're saying, hey, look at what Ben Franklin. They both Edwin Land and Vannevar Bush would reference the same people. They're like, look at Leonardo da Vinci. Look at Ben Franklin. He's like, they knew a lot about a lot of things. And so even if like in Ben's case, like if he's building the first vertically integrated media company, he's also reading about politics and conducting science experiments. So it's like, be a broad person that is knowledgeable about a lot of subjects, even if you're narrowly focused in your profession. So I don't know if that answered Bilal's point, but I do think the smartest people, and Steve Jobs talked about this. He's like, Michelangelo didn't just know how to sculpt; he knew a lot about quarry and stone, and like, it's like
the idea of like cross training for fitness, right? Is like this is why you have like the multi-sport. Almost like every quarterback like basically play baseball too. It's like it gives you a different skill set. Tons of Hall of Fame level quarterbacks were like drafted in the MLB. Cross training super important. But 2 things I want to talk about Steve Jobs and focus is, and you'll know both of these stories, but I think they're super relevant. The first one was obviously when he came back, when Apple bought Next Computing, and he came back, Apple near bankruptcy. But the thing that he said that I thought the most important lesson from there. So there's a famous story where he goes into, the whiteboard, and he goes, guys, we're getting rid of all these product lines. We got way too many product lines. We're just doing 4 products. So
Yep.
a 2x2 diagram, right, is like consumer, professional, and then a desktop, and then laptop. 4 products. You just do those quadrants. But the other thing that I found super fascinating was what it goes exactly to your point. He's like, we can be an unprofitable $10 billion company, or we can be a profitable $6 billion company. I don't care if we lose revenue. I want us to focus, because if we trim the business down, we can keep this thing going. And the other one, which you like, I saw the founders tweet like it was Jony Ive talking about Steve Jobs and focus. And the very specific thing he said was this, is like, focus isn't like saying no to, like, you mentioned a bunch of things like, hey, I have all these opportunities, I'm saying no to them. It's saying no to something that you really want to do, right? It's like Jony Ive literally says, it's like with every bone in your body, you want to do something, but you got to say no. And the way Steve used to hit these guys up is he knew a lot of them would have the like sacrificial no's where they pretend that they're giving something up. And then Steve's like, no, you don't really care about that. I need you to put something real on the table that you're going to chop, right? But
real quick, let me just add one thing because you brought it up. I was rereading my notes from that speech that you're talking about when he came back to Apple in '97, because I think everybody talks about, hey, we're going to focus our product line, right? But if you listen to the words he said, he's like, we're going to innovate not only in product, we're going to innovate in marketing and in distribution. And so that third part, keep having private conversations. Is just like, people do not understand the innovation for products, especially selling to businesses or to founders. The innovation and distribution is podcasts. And it may be the most powerful, like new innovation on how to sell a business product, because if you have a founder, an executive, somebody interested in startups, an investor, these are learning machines. These people learn, they dedicate so much more time to continuous learning than like the average person off the street. It's like not even fucking comparable, right?
Dude, I love that.
And
that's
the
a great
reason,
point.
this is why I think audio is more important than video, because these kind of people, right? They don't have the time to sit around and watch fucking videos all day, dude. They're listening to my podcast and your podcast when they're at the gym, when they're on the commute, when they're doing other shit.
Yeah.
They are not going to sit down.
That is so interesting, man. I love, dude. It's like you basically are describing the market segmentation for the top 1% of corporate America. How do these individuals consume, right? It's like a version of, you know, how in most families, the mother or the mother partner, the mother is spending most of however much income is coming to the family, right? Responsible. But like you're giving a version of that. It's like, hey, this is the market you're going after. And not to say that everybody should want or need to go after the market, but you're explaining why it's super valuable. And actually something that comes back to your math 30 minutes ago, David mentioned Masters of Doom, the book about the creation of Doom. But you said that, and I think this is so important, goes back to what you said 2 minutes ago. It's not just product innovation that people think about, right? You said it's distribution, marketing, which was what Steve Jobs said. But I think something so interesting is it goes exactly to the point of the iPhone. Was the iPhone an absolutely remarkable hardware, software fusion, new product invention? Yes. But what was the actual reason it was able to become successful? This is what Steve Ballmer says. Steve Ballmer's like, I got the iPhone wrong. When it came out, I said, there's no chance this could sell.
Yeah.
It's because it's $500. Is that I didn't understand that there was a go-to-market innovation. And the go-to-market innovation was to work with the carriers. I completely missed that. So Steve Jobs goes to the carriers and says, hey, we're going to give you exclusive access to the iPhone. You just need to subsidize it. And that's actually what Steve Ballmer says is the reason Apple was able to succeed versus all of Microsoft's efforts. So,
and I would add one other thing there. You mentioned it earlier, like, hey, just because there's a lot of shitty threads doesn't mean they're all shitty. That's a main idea from the history of entrepreneurship. If you study the life of Walt Disney, and I'm rereading a 700-page biography of him, so it'll be an episode in probably like 2 or 3 weeks. And what was fascinating about Walt Disney is like everybody thinks, you know, he created one of the best media companies of all time. That library may be the most valuable content, arguably, most valuable content library in the world, I would argue. That's not. He's like I'm proud of 2 things at the end of his life. Most proud of 2 things. I'm proud of starting my company, keeping control of it, because his first company, he lost control and he went bankrupt, right? Which a lot of people don't know. And the second thing, he's like, I'm most proud of Disneyland, right? And there's a book called Disney's Land. So Disney's Land, I think it's like episode 150 or some shit like that. I don't even know. It's in the archive. But I'd read the book, even if you don't listen to the podcast, because it's all about how he thought about the creation of Disneyland. And his whole point was like, when he's building it at the time, amusement parks, there was no such thing as like a Disneyland or Universal Studios. And then he goes, they were all like poorly, they were dirty, they were run by scam artists because they were like circus people, right? And so people kept going up to Walt Disney and they were like, why the hell are you doing an amusement park? They're dirty places. And his point was their mediocrity is my opportunity. And he goes, that's the point. Mine won't be. The opportunity is there. Everything out in the market right now sucks. Disneyland is not going to suck.
Oh, that's such a great, because dude, that's so fascinating. It's amusement park, which is like the carnival stuff, but he made theme parks, right? That was the difference. He's like, I'm going to theme everything, bring it into the IP. And like you said, it's going to be way better than these amusement parks.
And he thought like it was an ongoing movie you could always do. But the reason that came to mind was what you just said is because Steve Jobs arrived at the same conclusion. So yes, there was innovation on the carrier level, but the Apple stores, like I pulled up on my phone where you're talking, because this is what I was texting somebody yesterday. This is a direct quote from Steve from this, right? He goes, we have not kept up with innovations in our distribution. We will not only catch up where the best of the best are in distribution, but we will be innovating and breaking new ground in distribution. And I'm telling you right fucking now, that's exactly what podcasts are doing for the people that I'm targeting, right? And so there's a story that happens before that where very similar. Gateway, remember? Huge company.
Oh yeah.
Had all these stores when we were like kids or teenagers or whatever, right? And at the time where Steve has this idea for Apple stores, Gateway is closing them down. So they're like, Steve, what are you doing? Clearly this idea is not going to work because Gateway couldn't make it work. And his whole point is like, there's no differentiation in the Gateway products. They compete on price. He goes, I'm not competing on price. There's differentiation in the Apple product. And in the previous distribution channel, they would put a Gateway computer or any kind of Windows computer next to an Apple. And since they weren't Apple-owned salespeople, there was no education. He's like, I need to control all this. So his innovation and distribution, which in my opinion is even more important than the carrier level, is Apple stores, which everybody told him, don't do it, not going to work. And then what happens? It's the most successful retail store in history. I think they do the most
square foot.
$1 per square foot. It's like, you could go to a mall today, even today, everything else be fucking empty. Apple store's packed. And that's the whole point. It's like, don't just pay attention. Like, fucking listen to what he's saying. These people are not like when he came and you said he was dropping gems when he was talking to Bezos and the Segway guy. He is like, if you fucking listen to him, he'll drop gems, right? And he's just like, okay, yeah, of course we're going to innovate in our products, because he says our products right now suck. He says there's no sex in them is the word.
Yeah, that was the greatest line.
He's like, who the fuck? He's like, why would I do, the Apple 6000 compared to Apple 3000? He's like, if I can't figure this out, how can customers figure it out? So yeah, it's a lot of common sense. But then it's like marketing. Marketing is about values. That's a quote from Steve Jobs. He's like, people don't buy. We're not going to fucking buy. Not going to say, hey, Apple, this is the speeds and the feats. He's like, this is what we believe in. And he says, he's like, we're just going to do what Nike does. Nike doesn't tell you how much soles, like what their sole, their shoe is. They celebrate great athletics. And he's like, so we're going to celebrate people, that the most creative people in history, because we know if they were alive today, they would use Apple products. So again, it's the whole thing. It's like product, marketing, and distribution. You could innovate in all of them. And the center of this discussion is in our podcast. My point is like, we haven't even touched, it's not even 1% of distribution for podcasts in themselves, because you guys just said they're so fucking hard to grow.
I never thought about this, dude. You just actually broke my mind thinking about the innovation potential of this as a distribution, and it all goes back to everything. So why is audio so effective, right? I mean, it was the original form of storytelling. Oral societies. We didn't have the printing press until the 1400s, right? And
I went on Jim's podcast. Yeah. I just said this because it's like, and again, that was somebody else's idea, where it's just like somebody wrote that the tweet was, newspapers are a fad. The village storyteller is as old as language, except now the campfire is the internet, and there's like 6 billion people in the village.
Yeah.
He said it a lot better than I did, but that's essentially the thing. It's just like, oh, since the invention of language, like the primary method of us communicating with each other has been verbal.
Yep, 100%.
You guys should have. You guys know Blake Robbins?
I do know Blake. We've chatted about. He's really smart.
I'd have him on the podcast because he knows way more about a lot of the shit I'm regurgitating. I just learned from Blake. Blake listens to Founders too, and I've had an opportunity to talk to him, and he's like super smart. He says the same stuff you guys. He's like, he's on the edge of the internet, just like you guys are.
He's way more edge though. I've seen some of his stuff. Like he's deep in Reddits, Discords. Yeah.
He's got a ton of ideas. And again, like the hour or two I spent talking to him, like, how much would that cost? You know what I mean? Just because you put out content that other people find valuable, they're just like, hey, like, I've gotten value from listening to you. Like, I'm willing to reciprocate. It's one of the oldest, like, main themes of humans. Like, if somebody does something for you, you feel the need to reciprocate to them. So he's super smart. I try to get him on here if you could.
Do you guys want to do some rapid fire?
Go for
from
it.
Individuals. Bilal, did you want to talk?
No, go for it. I said one.
Okay.
There were a few names that we mentioned before, like my favorite. I mean, I'm still working through all the catalog right now, David, but some of my favorite ones for people who are listening want to try them out. Bourdain's one I really, really loved. Also, because I just recently watched the documentary, and I'm like in like travel mode a bit right now, and it's just like he represents food and travel and like adventure for me. So like, you know, it's a great story, and you did a great job of it. I think the Jay-Z one is probably still my favorite. Just
Dude,
because
I can't tell you how many people tell me about that one. That hit a nerve. I was surprised.
Oh yeah, I was saying to Trung. I mean, Kanye is hard to touch right now with what's going on, but I mean, I know you've referenced the Kanye documentary, which we've talked about on the pod before. But just
okay,
like,
so I was having that documentary.
You had to spike an episode, didn't you?
Yeah, because I recently, like literally like a couple of days, I was like, fuck, I'm not touching that thing. This is why I like studying dead people, because they're way less controversial.
They can't get well, actually dead people still get canceled quite a bit, but at least you can get a.
But you kind of know what the lay of the land is, right?
There's not like I'm gonna be like, here's the 10 leadership lessons of Hitler or some shit like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, like for most part, like they don't have, like the intensity has died down. I was having that documentary transcribed, the first 2 episodes, because I think the first 2 episodes is the founder's journey in 2 hours.
So good.
And so I have it transcribed, and I was gonna use that instead of a book. I was gonna use that as a document to work off of. And I was like, bro, I'm not touching this. Like I have literally like I wish I could show you guys. I have hundreds of books to get to. Like I'm not doing that.
I need to interject you quickly. You're a huge Bill Burr fan, as you mentioned, so am I. He was the last live comedy act I saw pre-COVID, actually. And if you I know you'll know this reference, but listeners, if you want to know why comedians are the world's, society's truth tellers, go Google Bill Burr Hitler. Because he has this bit about Hitler, and everything he says is true. But the way we're supposed to think about Hitler is like, we can't, like, you'll be laughing and like, I can't believe you said that. I know
that's what makes it funny, is that you're like struggling inside.
Listen, if you watch this guy on stage, the guy's an animal. Like, he's really good at what he does, which is good. Which is objectively true, right? Like, he rallied a nation to do something awful. It's because he was really good at that, right? And it's like, he wasn't like, the Bill Burr bit it's so good, and you will.
I saw Trung take a deep gulp there, by the way.
I think like how Bill Burr was able to communicate it, though, right? It's like, I'm not going to do justice, so I'm not going to touch it. It's like, I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm just saying, I think that bit will make you guys laugh and understand why comedians are the greatest truth tellers.
The new special he does, where he's at Red Rocks and he does the abortion bit, and it's just like, by the end of that bit, every side is pissed off. Like,
that's a Bill Burr special there.
It's just like, and his whole point is, a lot of it has to do with something that, like, I think knowing this, I don't really care about the current affairs part of it, but like, tribalism is just deep in our nature, and I'm curious how to use it to spread a product that I feel is valuable. You know what I mean? So like, that's why I learn about this stuff. Like,
interesting.
So it's just like, how do you, like, one of my favorite episodes that I've done, I think it's episode 244. You guys got to listen to it. It's on the founder of In-N-Out, right? And I'm I've lived on the East Coast, so it's like, not like I understand they have a cult following, but it's like, oh, this is anytime you find this weird cult following, whether it's like a Ferrari, a Polaroid, an Apple, an In-N-Out, it is always traced back. Rolls-Royce, I did the guy that the founding engineer of Rolls-Royce. It is always traced back to this like relentless, obsessive building the best possible product they can at no matter the cost. And the reason the In-N-Out thing is easy to understand is because everybody understands. It's a lot easier to understand how to make a hamburger than it is how to make a Rolls-Royce, right? And you just realize, like, at every turn, when the rest of his industry is cutting corners, lowering, like trying to make it less expensive and less quality, Harry Snyder's his name goes in the opposite direction. And that, even the way he expanded, when he died, they only had 17 restaurants. And now you fast forward, his granddaughter is the one that's running the company now, like multiple generations. And I was just in California. Like I tried to go to In-N-Out twice. Or no, I went to In-N-Out in San Francisco. Last time I was in LA, which is a couple months before that. I couldn't, the lines are too long.
Just packed. Yeah.
I just give up. I think studying, like, why are people so into what they're into? And unfortunately, in Hitler's case, I've read a bunch of books about this. Is like, it's fucking crazy. Like they were murdering children. Like murder. There's a guy named Ziggy Wilzig. His biography came out recently. It's called Unstoppable. And he survived Holocaust. And there's stuff in that book. Like he watched all of his nieces and I think they were nieces and nephews, like 7-year-old girls murdered. It's like, how the fuck does that happen?
Well, this is if you can't draw lessons from what happened during that time period, then you're incapable of drawing any lessons, right? And like the famous line from Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet author, and who actually helped take down communism from his writing, he's like, the good and bad runs through every single person. That's the lesson, right? It's like normal, like what you think ethical civilians, we're all caught up in this mess. And it's what you said about the tribalism is like, every single person is capable of this. This is what people need to understand. That's the scary part. Well, World War II. That's and the Vietnam War in my family's case, right? Or Bilal's family's from Pakistan. Like when partition of India in 1947, when India became an independent state, and then I guess it was East Pakistan. East
from Bangladesh and
perfect example of this.
Kashmir. Yeah,
everyone is capable of this. That's the entire point. This is why you need to study history.
If we can get to positive after this, we can get on the subject. Yeah. But like, me and you both love Dan. I heard you speak about it. Dan Carlin's
it's the greatest podcast.
The 5-part series he did on the war between the Imperial Japan and China. So
Supernova
the perfect example of what you just said is in every person, there's evil and good, depending on their circumstances and where they're at. How does that the entire series kicks off where there's this guy in the 1970s in Philippines, right? Like people are walking by and he's in the jungle or like in the like the forest, wherever, and he's like shooting at regular people. It's like, what the hell's happening? They realized that there was a Japanese soldier that had landed on the Philippines. When he landed there, they said, no matter what, you keep this fight up until like forever.
The emperor tells you it's over, right?
Yeah. And how the podcast starts is they would like drop in. They would try to like, they couldn't catch him. So they like they figured out who he was. They started dropping in newspapers. And the newspaper saying like the war is over and like what, this is 30 years later. What the fuck are you doing? And he didn't believe him. He's like, this is propaganda because the emperor said that you can't take us alive. What did they have to do? They had to go and get his commanding officer who lived in Japan. This is like 20 years after the war ends, right? He lives in Japan. They show up and he is able to convince his former, because he's their subordinate, like he's the person in charge. He convinces his former subordinate, no, this is true, and like give up. And that's the way they did it. And so Dan talks about this, the same group of people that would kill the enemy soldiers. They'd cut off the enemy soldiers' hands at the wrist, the feet at the ankle, and their penis and their penis and balls. They'd put they'd sit their corpses down. They'd put their hands and your feet in your lap and your penis and your balls in your mouth. Yeah. Those same people that were doing that, 25 years later, you know where they found his commanding officer? He was a bookseller.
Yeah.
He was selling, in one human life, goes from mutilating dead bodies in war to selling your grandmother books.
Totally. Exactly, man. That like, again.
That's why Dan Carlin's a master. That's why he's the best of the best. Because
exactly.
He ties all that together. I'm like, oh,
human
shit.
nature. Done deal.
But the way he weaves the story is just incredible.
So as you mentioned, we need to pull back into positive land.
Yeah. We might want to cut that, bro.
No, we're keeping it. We're keeping it. Why don't we do this because you're definitely going to come back with Jack Butcher, because actually listening to your podcast, I think, and you've probably seen Jack Butcher's Jack's most famous graphic that you're here, the chart that just compounds. That's one of the greatest visuals. Like that's literally visualizing Valley, if you will. Mm-hmm. Let's hit, when we do this, we'll hit some rapid fire, and it's going to be impossible for you to do, but I'm going to force you to do it. You need to give one lesson from these individuals. Okay, so we mentioned Jay-Z.
That's going to be good.
One lesson for Jay-Z. Hit us.
Oh, he hits it perfectly. I talk about this in the the Kobe episode that I just recorded, because like the worst advice you can give to somebody is be realistic. And Kobe goes to a summer ball camp. He's 11 years old. And you have to fill out a form like, what are your career plans? And he put MBA. And the counselor pulls him aside. He's like, listen, it's 1 in a million. You need to pick something else. And Kobe's like, I'm that 1 in a million. And so with Jay-Z, it's like, if you were to go look, and he talks about in that book, you go and look at a 15-year-old Jay-Z, right? He's high school dropout. His dad, he has no dad. He's living in the projects. He's the youngest of 4 children. And you say, hey, in 30 years from now, you're gonna get to the top of your profession of an industry that just started, which is the hip hop industry. You're gonna start and sell multiple companies for hundreds of millions of dollars. You're going to become a billionaire. You're going to marry one of the most beautiful women in the planet, and you're going to live in an $80 million house in Bel Air. You just got to hold on for 30 years. Like, no, that sounds fictional. And so Jay-Z says, he goes, it's the founder's journey, and really it applies to founding a company, starting a podcast, climbing a mountain, doing anything that's difficult, that is hard to do. He's like, it's the dream of being the exception. And it's like, unless you have that in you, you're like, this is why I say misfits only understand misfits, founders only understand founders. It's like, unless you think like this, you're going to be seen as crazy from the outside. That counselor thought 11-year-old Kobe Bryant was crazy, and Kobe was right.
Yep.
Love that.
This is to your point about, again, bring it back. Everything gets tied with you, man. The Naval is like, be the best. Be the absolute long tail in whatever you choose to do. Whatever you narrow and distill your life's like path in. This is, again, not everyone has this temperament, right? Like you said, certain people do. I love that lesson. I got one for Bilal here. Episode 218. I can't even pronounce his name. Johan Cruyff. Legendary Netherlands, a Dutch soccer player, and then later coach. What is the legend? So Bilal,
I listened to that one as well. That was good.
Man crush on Cruyff a bit. Bilal, explain to the listeners. He's one of the biggest legends.
Yeah, he's one of like legendary old school footballer, and then he also I didn't actually know a lot of the stuff until I listened to that episode. But just how much of the new stuff I've learned about like advanced tactical play that is basically prominent right now came from his book. Is it Total Football, I think it's called, or something?
It's like a whole entire philosophy.
It's a whole philosophy.
It's
and
an
I think
operating system, I guess, is the way to think about it.
What's the lesson? What's the lesson?
That is actually interesting. One is that like some things are a byproduct of like who your parents were, right? His dad worked as like a groundskeeper or something he was essentially like getting in trouble when he was like 5 years old because he wouldn't stop kicking a soccer ball in school or a football, or whatever you guys call it, right? But so just the importance of practice, that the dude was practicing all the time, and whatever your craft is, you can find that. But like, so that is a lesson, but I feel that is a lesson that's applicable to almost across the board of anybody I've read about. What really, like how I think about it is it's like, what I took away from that is like the effect that you're going to have on your children. Right. And so he is writing that book 50 years after his father dies. And his father dies of cancer. I think he was like 45 years old. He died young, right? And so, and this happens a lot where it's easy. Like, I know, Trung, you have a kid. Bilal, you don't have kids, right? Not yet, right? Okay. So once you have kids, right, you can't believe, like, it's so obvious how much you love them, right? But you don't realize, like, so when I think of like my son or my daughter, I'm like, I fucking, like, I quote Cormac McCarthy's book, The Road, which is Cormac McCarthy's my favorite fiction writer, American fiction writer. And in The Road, it's fundamentally a story about a father and son.
It's a zombie apocalypse is the background, right?
Yes, but it's really a relationship between a father and son, which is why Cormac's a master. But there's a line in there I tell my daughter, and my son's too young to understand. It's like, I was sent here by God to protect you. I will kill anybody that lays a hand on you. Like I tell my daughter, you say you love me. You have no idea that like love flows down the generations. Like I love you way more than you ever loved me. Yeah. But that does not to diminish how important the impact you can have on your kids. So for me, it's like when I make a decision, it's like, I'm not trying to make a decision based on what I'm going to do in my life. It's like, how does this affect my kids? Or in some cases, my grandkids aren't even born yet. Like, and so Johan Cruyff or Cruyff, I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Cruyff.
Thank you. Like he would go, like the impact that his father had. And so it's like, just if you make your decisions on like right now, our kids are too young, right? But one day they're going to be able to take the measure of the man. And when that point happens in my life, I want to make damn sure like they are impressed by what they see. You know what I mean? Like I want to take care of my health.
I love that.
I want to educate myself as much as possible, get as smart as possible. I want to make as much money and not do dumb shit. I want to treat their mom correctly. I want to be as good a person as I can. I want when they get older, like my dad's a bad motherfucker. Like that's what I like. I want to like, he is a bad motherfucker. Like he started out with first person in his family to graduate high school, first person not to go to jail in 3 generations. Like, and look what this motherfucker did. Like, this is some crazy shit. And I think about that when I make my podcast now. It's like my son and my daughter will one day listen to this when I'm long after I'm gone. And so Johan, he loses his dad. I think he's 12 years old. And what he would do is he would go, when he had a big decision to make in his life, he would go to his dad's grave and he'd talk to him. He would talk to him as if he was still alive. The shit makes me want to fucking cry. And he said he'd leave. He's like, all right, thanks, Dad. He'd go home, go to bed. And the next morning he'd have the answer he's looking for. And so what I learned from that book, the most powerful idea from that book is like, man, it's not just my life extends way past me. When I am gone, I'm going to have influence. And the decisions I'm making today will have influences on my children. The way I think about this now is like my dad's father died when I was like 4 years old, right? But he was born. He was like around my age. He was like 38 years old, living in Havana, Cuba, when Castro took over. And he had no education, no money. He had a wife and a baby boy. And that baby is my father. And he's like, something told him, I got to get the fuck out of here. This is some bad shit, but I have no money, no education. I'm going to go to a country. I don't know anybody. And he took that giant risk. So that decision by a man I never met or that I can't remember meeting changed the entire trajectory of my life. And that's why I'm an evangelist for reading biographies, because you see the full scope of a person's life. The people that their family before they were born, what their circumstances were, them as a child, them as they're building the company, and then them as they die. And it just changes the way that you're going to make decisions in your life.
That is a fantastic lesson.
That was awesome, man. And I'll just add to what you just said there. Like for me as well, personally, just like growing up, the only books I basically read as a kid were autobiographies and biographies. They were always my favorite. So a book, as I got older, I ended up, reading other stuff. But like, again, not to make this into like a therapy session, but what I kind of learned later in life was, when you're going through bad stuff, basically, you're in an environment you don't want to be in or whatever, you have to kind of imagine, right? You have to you have to dream and you have to think like, okay, how do I get out of this? And the only way to do it sometimes is like either watching movies, and like some people get into that, or like reading a book. And for me, it was always like entrepreneurs, like that was just something I was always interested in. And like reading that book and be like, wow, like they made this happen from nothing, and they were in a similar situation to me or even worse. And like, so I think that is obviously
you draw strength from reason.
Exactly.
When Kobe's going through all these problems in his beginning of his career, right? He talks about, hey, I picked up Jackie Robinson's autobiography and realized, oh, I don't have problems. Like you put it in a historical context, perspective. Like, that Jackie Robinson went through some shit. I'm getting paid millions of dollars. Things aren't going that well right now in my basketball career from Kobe's perspective. So he's like, I'll just pick up this book. And then he drew strength from it. And then he puts it down. He's like, okay, I'm ready to go again. Yeah.
And then David, another one, if we've got time, linked to kind of what you just said there about the importance of your parents. On the flip side, the one that I really loved that you did was Francis Ford Coppola and the role of his dad. And for people who don't know, he made The Godfather, and eventually his dad, who was a musician, ended up, I think, Trung definitely knows.
I hear Trung talk about Coppola all the time.
I talk about him a lot. Anyways, go ahead.
But I don't want to say the full story, but essentially, like he had a not so great relationship with his dad in the beginning, it seems like. But was there anything especially that you took from that one?
So you never know when a line will just hit you and you'll never forget it. I read that, probably 20 or 30 books ago. And there's a line in the book that says, you can always understand the son by the story of his father. The story of the father is embedded in the son. Since that, I may have said that on every single podcast since then. I said it in the Kobe thing, because you realize like Joe was kind of a fuck up and Kobe was like the opposite. And it's like, Joe's out here cheating on his wife. Well, I guess they all cheat, my bad. So that's a bad example. Kobe's out there, or Joe's out there because he gets caught with another woman in a car.
Not dedicated to the craft, like you mentioned.
Yeah, so like Joe's out here, gambling, doing cocaine and drinking alcohol. And Kobe is like 19 years old in LA and won't even go out to he's just working all the time. Like they're completely opposites. And so I've been a huge, I wasn't a fan of like Lakers or like I love basketball, but I've been a fan of how Kobe approached his work way before he died. And now, even after reading a ton about him or listening to him speak, now I have an even better understanding. I was like, oh, like the story of the father is embedded in the son. And so in Francis Ford Coppola's part, his father was a musician, and he said fucked up shit to his kids. Like, there can only be one genius in the family, and you're not it. Like, who? I have kids.
Wait,
like,
yeah, that's crazy, right?
Like, what is wrong with you? There was another thing that just happened. I just read the 60-year-old biography of Thomas Edison, and same thing. Like, some of these stories you don't even believe, where like Thomas Edison, when he's like 6 years old, tried to burn down like the family barn. Obviously, don't do that. Don't do arson. But his father's reaction was bizarre, where he put up flyers in the little town they're in and saying, hey, show up in the town square on Saturday morning to watch me beat the fuck out of my kid.
Come on.
And swear to God.
Wow.
So he beats the fuck out of them, and they show up. It's like their form of entertainment. You know what I mean? So like, you have a hard time understanding how you could do this to your children. And so when I read the Francis Ford Coppola biography, I'm like, dude, how do you deal with that? And then you realize it's like, oh, hurt people hurt people. The entire time, his father is striving to be successful as a musician, and he just fails and fails and fails. And he got to the point where he had a hard time holding down a job. And as a byproduct of that, he didn't look internal, right? He didn't say, well, I must be doing something wrong. This is why I like have to be very selective who I keep around me, because there's a lot to dislike in humanity, right? In human nature. Like, we're fatally flawed, in my opinion. So it's not like, I should do something. Maybe I should practice more. Maybe find a different opportunity. He's like, no, you know what I'm going to do? I know the problem. I'm just going to hate on all the successful people. Francis Ford Coppola's dad would have been on Twitter. Let's just put it that way. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
he'd
that's
be
what he would have been.
Everyone.
Yeah.
He'd be one of those bot accounts, basically.
And so, like,
you're
LeBron,
right. You're right.
He'd be Skip Bayless. Oh, LeBron, man. 3 rings, 3 and 7 in the finals, 4 and 6 in the finals.
And what do you do? Exactly. Like, so, like, Michael Jordan's not going around leaving negative comments on people's YouTube videos. Like, he's too busy. Like, he's
actually know the thing
like,
about, I do want to do a segue here. Is like a quick one is, I finally got to watch, do you ever see Jordan talk about who he thinks the greatest of all time is? And you've probably seen
Dr.
this. And
J?
you mentioned it. Yeah, no, but he said to your, I think you've mentioned it in your previous chats. He obviously, David Thompson was a big influence. He said his most recent one that I saw was a couple of years ago. He says, I don't play that game anymore. And you've talked about this with Kobe, and I've heard you mention is like, he just thinks everybody learns from everyone, right? Just pass it along.
So he does that. And then he also says it's a team. Like, if you're going to debate, you have to debate as a team game. You have to say, hey, my 91 Bulls versus whoever. But let me just have the Francis Ford Coppola thing. Why is that important? Because Coppola was known as being an absolute savage. He would work. He'd fall asleep at the editing. Like, he'd fall asleep editing a movie, wake back up, and start again. So something happened where he sees the unsuccess, the lack of success that his dad has, and it turns on a switch. And Coppola, I think Trung made this point when he was on Jim's podcast, Infinite Loops, with, is it Rob Henderson?
Yeah, Rob Henderson, legend.
We got to talk about Eric Jorgenson before he bounced off too. We can't forget that. But you made the point. It's like, well, he put up a decade, maybe like
one of the greatest runs. I think it's one of the greatest runs in
you know what I mean? Like,
and you'd have to, I actually looked through it. I'm like, okay, who else has had these creative runs? Like, so basically between 72 and 79, he made Godfather 1, Godfather 2, Conversation, Apocalypse Now. Easily 3 of the 15 top movies taken on Conversation. And then the other ones that I thought, like, oh, what's comparable? Like, the Beatles had about a 4-year run in the 60s where they did, I think, 2 or 3 of the most important albums ever. I think that I don't know anybody else that kind of has that level of consistency. What the sad part is, he hasn't even touched anything since, right?
And he made so little money for the success he had.
Yeah,
that he winds up making way more money selling wine than he ever did off movies.
Wine, yeah. Let's do this. I think I'm gonna have to do something related to taking my kid to school. So do this. Let's talk about Jorgenson. Okay. I didn't know what we want to talk about. Could you just give us a super 30-second lesson from Schwarzenegger? Because I also really enjoyed that.
Oh, that was a good one too. I was listening to that when we spoke a few days ago.
So actually. there's two things you need with Schwarzenegger.
Arnold.
He has everybody knows his Total Recall biography. It's like huge. I read it. It's like 600 pages or something like that. He wrote it when he was like a 70-year-old man. Amazing book. One of my best books ever. There is a lesser known biography because it's not even an autobiography. He wrote when he was 30. He had not yet gone into movies, or he just started making the transition. But it's called The Education of a Bodybuilder. It's not a book about bodybuilding. You read the first 113 pages. It is a 113-page autobiography of his first 30 years of his life. And it's Arnold saying, hey, you see all the traits that I have and how I got to top my profession in bodybuilding. I'm going to use that same framework and I'm going to dominate. I'm going to build a business empire. I'm going to get to the top of movies. I'm going to do whatever I want. He calls a shot. So Arnold's easy. There's a million different things you could say, but his whole thing is like everything in life is reps, reps, reps. So it's just like, if I wanted to be a good bodybuilder, I had to do 10, more than 10,000, hundreds of thousands of reps. If I wanted to learn how to speak English without, where you could actually understand me, I had to do it, 3 hours a day, every day, forever. If I wanted to, he winds up making like his first $1 million in real estate. If I wanted to learn how to do real estate, I had to do real estate deal after do a real estate deal. But that's what I think a lot of people don't understand. It's like they compare where they're at now to where this person is, even like with Founders. So like Founders is great now. Yeah, but go listen to episode 2. Go listen to episode 3. Go listen to it took me 5 years to even get to an okay part where I listened to past podcasts. I'm like, I could have said that in, 2 paragraphs instead of a page. I forgot to tie in that thing. Like, I think of it like watching game tape, It's like, I see the mistakes and the stuff I wouldn't do today. And so I think that's just really important. It's just like, man, everything takes a lot of time. Steve Jobs is the best example of that, where like he's remarkable in the sense that he built successful products in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, and then 2010, right before he died with the iPad. But like, if you look at his, like, even though he made great products when he was like 20, 21, it's like his best product didn't come until 3 decades in his career. That's the story for everybody. I do not read one book where a guy or a woman has an idea. It's like, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do X. I start doing X and I'm great at it. It's like, no, I want to do this. Oh shit, I got knocked down. I got to get back up. I make a little bit of progress. I get knocked down over and over and over again. It takes decades to do anything of worth doing.
Beautiful.
So everything is reps, reps, reps. That's
all right. Let's hit it. Let's hit it with Jorgenson, because you're definitely coming back. So we talked about. We were talking about Jorgenson right before because we're all friends with him. We think his book, if you have not read the Almanack of Naval, I keep it out all the time. So this is what the book will look like when I'm done. Like I have tons of things with it. Jack did the illustrations, which are absolutely fantastic. You could also read the book for free. I think it's at like the navalmanack.com or something. Just Google it. But we were talking about just how amazing this book is for anybody that's working in anybody. It's applicable to anybody building a business on the internet, right? Which we all are. But I think there's applicable ideas to things that are offline as well. But what I would say is, go listen to. He just did. I called Eric the other day because I heard him. Balaji has like this like writing school or something. It's like writing something. It's called like 1729 or something. But I was listening to. I do know that. Yeah.
Okay, so I heard Eric with my friend Camila that he was getting interviewed, and it was for Balaji's thing. And he goes, oh yeah, I did an 8-hour Zoom the other day with Balaji. And so I call Eric. I was like, what the hell was that like? And Eric's like, intense. So he just edited that down. Eric has a podcast. We should link it down below. It's called Jorgensen Soundbox, but it's episode 48. It is, if you want 4 hours, I think it's 4 hours. If you want 4 hours of Balaji, go listen to it. I'm like 2 hours into it. It's 3 hours and 52 minutes long.
Is that a new episode? I haven't listened to that one yet.
It came out like a week ago.
Nice.
Yeah. And so it came from the fact that because Balaji is like getting behind Eric. I don't know if we said this on air or not, but Eric's writing, just like he wrote the Almanack of Naval, he's writing the Almanack of Balaji.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And so it's going to be out, I think, Q1 of next year. And so that 8-hour long Zoom was prepped for, it's got a lot of that's going to show up in the book.
Incredible.
Unreal.
Amazing, man.
It was intense. I got to, man. So wait, let me leave on this because David, you'll laugh. So David, you've been thinking about podcasts for 6 years. Bilal is very professionalized in podcasting. He used to do it in the studio. And the funny thing about NIA, you can probably wrap a bow with this, is I didn't get a proper mic until like episode 75.
Yeah.
No,
and now that I got it,
that's a key. Me and you have the same mic now. But no, that's the key though, because everybody they hit me up. They're like, "Hey, what equipment do you use?" I'm like, "Dude, I used $100 mic for the first like 200 episodes. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Next to my desk, I've got it here.
Yeah.
This is the one I travel with. It's $50, but
it matters.
It's good enough. It needs to be good enough still.
Yeah, it can't be fucking terrible. But like, Alexis Rivas, who's the founder of Cover, who's one of the most important, like impressive modern day founders now. He's building like this startup on how to build houses like in a faster way to use technology and everything else. He's raised like 80 or $100 million from some crazy people. But anyways, like I met him through the podcast, and he told me, he's like, yeah, I was listening to episode 4 the other day. I was like, oh, please don't. And he goes, the sound quality sucks, but you can still learn. He's like, and I was like, that's the mentality. He's like, I don't give. He's like, I'm listening to this to learn something that'll benefit my career. If it's going to be shitty because you didn't know what you were doing, I don't give a shit. I'm like, that's a really. Thank you for telling me that. I was like, that's a fantastic mindset. And it's just the difference between people that really want it and people are like, oh, I'm not gonna do this because it sounds. All right, kick rocks, dude.
Yeah, completely.
Hey, Trung, you just had a 2-hour podcast with David and Bilal. How was it? Intense. It was intense.
Trung loves. He's got a side hustle as a voiceover guy now.
Okay, all right. My family just rolled down. That's
we got a boogie.
That's my sign. Yeah, we got a boogie.
Man. David, appreciate you coming on, man. This was amazing, man. We'll definitely do it again.
Appreciate
love
the
pod. Yeah, likewise, man.
Yeah,
mad respect for what you do. And go support our boy. Go and subscribe to his pod. Let us know what you think of this
podcast.
And we will see you guys next week. Cheers.